Good morning. On behalf of Chairman Janikowski, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Federal Communications Commission and to our workshop on expanding access with wireless technology. I'm Ruth Milkman, Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. With me is Karen Peltz-Strauss, who is Deputy Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Joel Gurin, who is the Chief of that Bureau, had hoped to be here today but is stuck in Los Angeles. But I think you'll all agree with me that Karen is a wonderful stand-in for him. Today's workshop will examine how we can help ensure that Americans with disabilities have full access to the benefits of wireless. Innovative services, communication services, applications, and devices play a critical role in full access. And we look forward to learning from all of our panelists and our exhibitors and all of you about how we can work together to make sure that new technologies are as inclusive as possible. When Congress established the Federal Communications Commission in 1934 as part of the Communications Act, it gave the Commission a mandate to make available, so far as possible, to all people of the United States a rapid, efficient, nationwide and worldwide wire and radio communication service. No word in that statement is more important than all. Unfortunately, for most of the 20th century and even into the 21st century, Americans with disabilities have lagged years and sometimes even decades behind in their access to communication services. When networks and devices were designed, little or no thought was given to how to make them accessible. When solutions were developed, they were often expensive and inconvenient retrofits that failed to provide true functional equivalence. In spite of that, and in part out of necessity, people with disabilities have often been innovators and early adopters of new technologies that can improve their ability to participate more fully in society. This year, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of another statute. When it passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, Congress recognized the right of people with disabilities to participate fully in American society. Title IV of the ADA amended the Communications Act to mandate the establishment of the Telecommunications Relay Service, which allowed millions of deaf and hard of hearing persons and people with speech disabilities to use the public phone system for the first time ever to connect to anyone they wanted to talk to, doctors, employers, friends, loved ones. The Commission also implemented requirements for telecommunications equipment manufacturers and service providers to consider the needs of Americans with disabilities. Our closed captioning rules have provided access to television news and entertainment. Manufacturers of handsets are required to ensure hearing aid compatibility. As a nation, we have made great strides, but we still have a long way to go. Wireless technology and mobile broadband bring great opportunities to engage in civic, economic, and social activities and to close the gaps that have existed historically for people with disabilities. Wireless broadband can enable people with disabilities to lead their lives with unprecedented independence, being out and about, while retaining the ability to remain connected to loved ones, employers, employees, caregivers, whoever. It means access to jobs, to commerce, to entertainment, to social networking, to news and government services. One of the most exciting things about mobile broadband is that as more and more intelligence and computing power is pushed to the edge of the network in the form of smartphones and other devices, assistive technologies can be deployed much more effectively than the expensive and often cumbersome solutions currently in use. For example, rather than relying on a dedicated screen reader or even a human screen reader, mobile devices can integrate text-to-speech or voice recognition technologies into their operating systems so that, or into applications. So a person who is blind or has low vision can hear emails, or a person who's deaf or hard of hearing can read a voicemail wherever they choose to be. Our first panel, which is moderated by Karen and myself, will discuss the current challenges to accessibility. And following that panel, we'll break for lunch. And I invite you during the lunch period to browse the technology exhibits and demos that have been set up here in this room. And then after lunch, we'll have a second panel that will discuss trends in technology and recommendations on how best to proceed. Elizabeth Lyle will then close the workshop with a preview of the upcoming Accessibility and Innovation Forum. And our technology demos will also be open for your viewing until the end of the second panel, that is, until 4 p.m. Thank you. Karen.
Hi, it's wonderful to have you all here. I'm Karen Peltz-Strauss, the Deputy Bureau Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. I'd like to welcome the esteemed panelists from the consumer advocacy, academia, and industry. I'd also especially like to welcome the companies and organizations who have set up exhibits and to demonstrate their latest and greatest in new technologies, including Motorola, Google, Qualcomm, WGBH, their NCAM, the National Center for Accessible Media, RIM, LG, Looktel, and Apple. I'd also like to welcome representatives from GSA, FEMA, the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, and the Department of Education. We appreciate your attending this event for us. And give special thanks to Gordon Fuller, who flew all the way here from Hawaii for this event. He's representing the 7 Hawaiian Councils for Independent Living. Gordon, we hear that you have a lot of broadband projects and will be joining us as well in July for the July celebration of the ADA. I'd also like to mention that it is absolutely wonderful to be back at the Commission at a time that the Chairman has a renewed commitment to disability access and to a greater consumer focus. Had Joel been here, he probably would have talked to you about a new endeavor that we're beginning on, which is to try to ensure that consumers have all the information that they need to make informed decisions in the purchase and acquisition of their products and services. One of these involves something called Bill Shock that just went out this week. It was a public notice asking the public for input on ways to alert consumers about potentially high charges before they add up. There's a lot of causes for bill shock, including unclear or misunderstood advertising or unanticipated roaming or data charges. And the Bureau asks for comment on the extent to which consumers can now monitor their wireless usage and know when they're exceeding their predetermined allocation of voice minutes, text messages, or data usage. Well, when this item was first discussed in the Bureau, of course, the question came up, if you're asking consumers to monitor their usage or to get notices about their usage, you have to make that accessible, don't you? So one of the questions that the notice asks is to what extent should this information be accessible, must it be accessible on wireless devices by people with disabilities? For example, will people who are blind or have low vision be able to receive information about the usage alerts and what is the best way of getting that information? What this points out is that virtually everything that we do that involves consumers involves people with disabilities. And as we go forward, we're hoping that everyone here that is a stakeholder in these issues, speaks out and up for ensuring that the Commission is covering the access that is needed by this population. Today is just an example of how this Commission will be gathering people and information together on disability access problems and solutions over the next several years. Again, you'll be hearing more about this, as Ruth mentioned, from Elizabeth Lyle later with respect to the upcoming Accessibility and Innovation Forum and the disability anniversary of the ADA, the FCC's anniversary of the ADA. We'll be doing a lot in the area of new media, so be prepared to see the FCC starting to utilize new media to reach out to people and gather ideas. And again, I don't want to steal Elizabeth's thunder, but I want to get you to stay here so you can hear all about what she's going to be saying. Okay, so now some technical issues. We are broadcasting this event on the internet. Anyone is welcome to send in questions or comments to accesswireless@fcc.gov. And we already welcome, hopefully they're on, although it's very early in the morning there, California's Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program. I also want to announce, well, actually, let me get to that in a second. That's going to be afterwards, the panel. I want to introduce you to the Disability Rights Office staff. If everybody in the Disability Rights Office staff could stand up. These are the people that are going to be working on these various issues that we're talking about. Let's see. Okay, this is a test of my memory. Nope, stay standing. Tracy Randolph, Sharita Kennedy. Back there is Andy Mullitz, Diane Mason, Marilyn Abraham, Dana Wilson, Cheryl King, Greg Leibach, Amy Brown, Francine Crawford, and Arlene Alexander. And I'm sure you won't remember their names right now, but hopefully you'll start seeing them more and more, and you'll be able to feel free to contact them. I also want to thank the people that have put together this event. Amazing planning went into this event. Pam Gregory, if you could stand up, and Monica Desai, and Kelly Jones, and Renee Crittenden. Am I forgetting anybody? Kelly Jones. I said Kelly. And there's Renee. Did I miss anybody?
Jeff Tigner.
Okay, what's his last name?
Tigner.
Jeff Tigner, thank you. The events like this just don't happen overnight, as you can imagine. There's an inordinate amount of planning, making sure that the exhibitors get here on time, have a place to set up, all the technology, the internet, web access, et cetera, the agenda planning. And I just want to, I think Ruth and I both want to thank the crew for putting together this event. I think that we're ready to start our first panel. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anything. So I'm going to move right into a couple of more logistics and then introduce the panelists. And we have a hard stop at noon. The panelists each have 10 minutes to speak. There is a timer, as you can tell, and there's a 1-minute warning. Now, how are we making this accessible? Okay, okay, good. We have pokers. Okay, a poke system. Very technical. For the question and answer period, there are people with pens and question cards. Please raise your hand, and someone will bring you a card. And if you need assistance in writing down your questions, somebody will provide that assistance for you. I also just wanted to thank representatives that came from Maryland Relay and the American Library Association. I'd forgotten to do that. And with that, I'm going to introduce the panelists. I think that what we'll probably do is I will introduce each panelist before each panelist speaks so that you're familiar with what that person has done. So the first panelist is going to be Randy Pope. And Randy is a volunteer with the American Association of the Deafblind. He has been a staunch advocate of the deafblind community on the state and national level for many years. He's a volunteer whose responsibilities are advocating for support service providers, accessible technology, communication facilitators, and public awareness, and he has day-to-day duties as a web developer. He was also instrumental in developing and coordinating a successful legislative training for deafblind people at AAPD's 2006 National Conference. Randy, welcome. We look forward to your comments.
And first of all, I want to thank you, Karen, for the introduction. And I want to thank the FCC for inviting me here to present. There are many issues facing the deafblind community currently. As you are aware, as a community, we have 1.2 million deafblind individuals living within the United States. And this is an estimate, by the way. And it also includes a variety of deafblind individuals. Some are hearing blind individuals who currently are experiencing a hearing loss. Also, you'll have deaf individuals who are experiencing a vision loss. We also have senior citizens who are experiencing both hearing and vision loss from the aging process. So you can see that we do have a variety within this deaf-blind group. Everyone has their own individual vision needs and also hearing needs as well. And it really is a challenge for us to meet all of the individual needs. We have some very serious issues that we're currently facing, especially related to technology and equipment. For example, cell phones. You see many individuals who use the text feature in their cell phones. The touch feature. Some are not accessible. Some are accessible with voice and some are not. Deafblind individuals, though, do rely on Braille. Those individuals have no access to their cell phones at all. They're not able to get the information they need. They're not able to hear, and they're not able to use the voice features. There's some special technology available. People who use Braille are able to access the phone, however, in a different way. The problem now is the cost. The cost may be up to $8,000 for this access for individuals who use Braille. And many deafblind individuals cannot afford this cost. We have other issues as well. We have people who have low vision. The font, when they're able to see their phones, but the font is not large enough for them to actually use it. There is no way that they can connect to a large print format in order to read the text on their phone. This is not available, such as a computer monitor. There are some deafblind individuals who are able to, in Wales, interpreter error, within the wireless system, they are able to have some access. However, the access is very limited. Instant messaging, for example, for individuals to be able to chat. For people who use Braille, some are still not accessible to them. So again, sometimes there are some features that are accessible and others are not. So again, we have a variety of issues that we are facing as a deafblind community. One of the pressing issues is that they may get equipment, but they're not trained in terms of how to use it. And also, as we know, technology changes rapidly. The features that are available within phones and a variety of equipment change. And the assistive technology companies have to make these rapid changes to meet the changing technology that's available. There are many examples that I could give to you here today. Our hope is that the government and the private sector work together. We know the deafblind community is a small community. We know that many companies are not able to afford the costs of research and development in order to come up with the new products or to make improvements to the current products that we need for our deafblind community. In closing, I would like to thank you for listening to our concerns. And I thank you.
Thank you, Randy. We're going to move now to Claude Stout. Claude Stout is the Executive Director of Telecommunications for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. He has been held that position since January 13th, 1997. He also serves as chair of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Consumer Advocacy Network, which is a national coalition of 20 organizations representing deaf and hard of hearing citizens in public policy and legislative affairs relating to rights, quality of life, equal access, and self-representation. He's also a member of the FCC's Consumer Advisory Committee and held many positions of distinction prior to these current positions, including several years as the Assistant Director for Community Affairs with the North Carolina Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Executive Director of the Missouri Commission for the Deaf, Assistant Executive Director for Business Services with the National Association of the Deaf, and an instructor for the Department of Business Administration at Gallaudet University. Welcome, Claude.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to give you a little bit of information about the deaf experience with wireless technology over the last 10 or 15 years. The reason behind this is because I'm going to leave it to the hard of hearing, Lisa, to explain more about the hard of hearing community while I go into detail about the deaf community. There are more hard of hearing consumers in the marketplace, over 4 times more than there are profoundly deaf people. The numbers are debatable in terms of how many people there may be in the United States in terms of deaf versus hard of hearing community. The deaf community would like to applaud industry and government for helping to improve our experience with wireless devices. You may remember 20 or 30 years ago that we had to make phone calls or communication when we were at home or at work, but not while we were on the go. And today we've seen some drastic improvements. We can access email on our phones or pagers wherever we are. We can browse the web from our mobile devices, or PDAs. It's an amazing change. There are still, however, some barriers to the experience, but first let me reflect on the positives that we've seen over the past years. I'd like to applaud companies like Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile for being fair with their pricing structures for users in terms of their monthly service fees. We initially started having to pay for voice and text plans, but now many of us pay only for what we call text-only plans or data-only plans. This is much more fair for the deaf and hard of hearing community who doesn't utilize their voice plan. Many of us also have access to email on our cell phones in the same way that we have access to email on our computers, so we are more productive while we are on the go and away from home or work. It's amazing. In the past, deaf users of TTY were able to use those with other deaf people who have TTYs, or to use relay services to communicate with hearing people who are accessing the phone. Today, pagers and PDAs are mainstream technology for both hearing and deaf users. So the accessible technology is not necessarily needed in this instance because professionals, even young people, are using pagers or PDAs that have text communication. So we are able to communicate with them on more of a level playing field now. There are, however, a few challenges. Pagers or PDAs often do not have GPS for open positioning, the global positioning system. Triangulation for these devices, in terms of using your wireless device with the GPS, when you're outside walking around needing to find out exactly where you're going, it utilizes several satellites in orbit in order to triangulate your exact location. And that is particularly important for 911 or emergency services. However, this triangulation does not work if we are inside because buildings prevent that those satellites from communicating with your wireless device. We're hoping that industry is going to work with our consumer advocacy groups in order to make sure that PDAs and GPSs, other wireless devices that utilize the global positioning system, are going to have access to triangulation information in emergency situations. And I'm ecstatic now that 911 phone calls can be made through IP relay or through video relay service, but we would like to have direct communication with these 911 call centers because sometimes through the communication assistants or through interpreters there can be breakdowns in communication with the 911 personnel in the center, particularly with the time lag in facilitating that communication. We know that wireless communication is not based on what you hold in your hand. It's based on access to information, and that determines your level of involvement in any community. For example, transportation via light rail. In Washington, D.C., we use the metro system for public transportation, and at every stop, a deaf person is going to have to try to look out the window to make sure they have not missed their stop. They want to make sure that they are on time for their trains, and they have to look around to see if they've arrived at their stop, how many stops are left. But that information is being provided via announcements. Announcements are also made in emergency situations or in the event that a train is derailed or there's another technical problem. But this information is not available in a text or visual format. We would like to advocate for the use of those types of text screens for access to that information. Those of you who have cars might listen to the radio while you're driving, but the deaf community doesn't have access to radio information. Often they may see, a deaf driver may see people who are leaving the highway and may follow them under the assumption that they are following some information they heard on the radio. They don't have captioned radio, so they don't have access to that information. They're trying to follow the crowd in order to get access to that information. There needs to be functional equivalence in terms of access to traffic and other emergency information while driving. There is captioning research or captioning radio research now saying that drivers cannot look back and forth between the road and their captioned radio. However, that would mean that I, as a deaf person, would have to pull over off the road, put my car in park, and then look at my captioned radio in order to get access to that information. But that's not functionally equivalent. Not only the telecommunications industry, but also the auto industry, the medical industry, and various other private sectors such as college and higher education can look into interactive systems that are wireless that can give access to information for deaf people via text, via captioning, or otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude. The next speaker is Paul Schroeder, and Paul is the Vice President of Programs and Policy of the American Foundation for the Blind. He's been in that position since 1994. He served as well as for 3 years as Director of Government Affairs for the American Council of the Blind before his current position. And currently he's responsible for activities related to legislative and public policy, research and demographic trends, training for service providers, and efforts to improve access and information concerning education, employment, independent living, and technology. He has been a leading advocate for years for amendments to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, including efforts to improve access to textbooks for students who are blind or visually disabled, visually impaired. He also oversees AFB's comprehensive web-based technology magazine, Access World. In addition, he has served as Vice Chair of the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, was President of the Alliance for Public Technology, and Vice Chair of the Telecommunications Access Advisory Committee. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks to the Commission for the invitation today and for holding this panel. And more than anything, thanks to the Commission, and I hope this gets transmitted throughout the Chair and the rest of the Commissioners as well, for a vigorous interest and attention to the needs and concerns of people with disabilities with telecommunications and technology as the Commission moves forward in its broadband plan. Want to give a special note and shout out to the Giant Leap paper, which I think is just an absolutely terrific resource. If people haven't read it, you should. It's a wonderful recitation of where we are in accessibility and a number of explanations that are quite good. I've been pushing our folks to have a look at it as well. AFB, American Foundation for the Blind, certainly wants to be a resource in this area, and Karen mentioned Access World. Interestingly enough, in this current issue that just went live this month, May, we have a review of Oratio, which you can see here in the exhibit with RIM BlackBerry. I'm assuming you have Oratio here, BlackBerry gang. And Android, the Google operating system, and Access built in. I don't know if they're here or not, but certainly that's another option. We've reviewed iPhone in recent months, and I'll say a word or two about all these things. So please see that as a resource. It's available on the AFB website, afb.org. Search for Access World, and you'll find lots of hopefully good material there targeting the needs of consumers with vision loss. Accessibility and affordability remain the twin towers, if you will, of accessibility challenges or challenges generally for people with disabilities, certainly people with vision loss. We estimate, based on publicly available data, over 25 million individuals with vision loss. Of course, the great majority of those individuals do have some usable vision, and I will be saying a few words about that today as well. But before I return to my remarks, I want to make a comment, as I've been trying to struggle with something over the last year or so. It's a challenge to be both an advocate and someone committed to solutions in this environment, an advocate for change and someone who pushes for change, but also working in an organization and being an individual who is interested in talking about and achieving solutions to accessibility. Of course, we just celebrated Mother's Day last weekend, and it always comes a day or two before my wife's birthday, so this is a really challenging time of year. And I realized that the best present I could give my wife for Mother's Day was to clean out my side of the closet. Now, we moved into our house 10 years ago, just a couple of months after the 255 regulations went into place. And I say that, you'll see why in a second. And I really haven't done much with the closet in 10 years. And you know, for about the last 5, she's been kind of gently suggesting that maybe I could clean up my side of the closet and make it look a little neater. I find that sighted people get really obsessed with how things look. And so I understand that. She's had to put up with a lot from me. So I did that this weekend. I spent good afternoon of into the evening, actually well into the night as it turned out, cleaning my side of the closet. And, I think a lot of guys probably have this experience. So what we want is, wow, congratulations for a great job. You really are awesome. What a great man you are for cleaning your closet. And just lots of, and I expected that. And to my wife's credit, she did do, she was very congratulatory. And I feel a little bit like that's where we are with the wireless industry. It's been 10 years. We've had plenty of time for, people to clean up the closet and to get things done. And we're getting there now. I mean, we have some great stuff here with Oratio and Google and iPhone and my friends in the rest of industry doing some interesting stuff. And, of course, there's third-party software. So, there's stuff starting to make its way. The closet's getting cleaner. The shelves are looking better. We're actually able to use a lot of this. But it's been 10 years, and I do get the sense that people want to hear nothing but congratulatory comments for, wow, we finally got around to serving people with disabilities. Aren't we great? And yes, I mean, it is great. And so this is the divided part of me, and I asked my wife for help on how I might interpret this, because I guess this is what women go through all the time, like how to deal with guys and figure out how to be congratulatory yet also recognize that, yeah, you could actually still be doing more. You could have cleaned that closet up 5 years ago. Could have maybe not even let it get to this stage. And I think this is true of only the women are laughing, by the way. The guys are like, man, you're outing us. This is not good. I feel like this is where we are, and I really do feel conflicted, and because there is a part of me that wants to just get up and scream at anyone who will listen. Are you kidding me? 10 years in, and this is all you have to offer? We have a couple of phones that kind of work. Some of them are really great, but they're also really expensive. What if I want a basic phone? What if I just want to be able to have a cell phone to call and text on a plan, and that I can get it for less than $50? Those phones, I am told, still exist. They're not that strong in the accessibility area. Well, so that was my Mother's Day experience. I don't know what I've gained from that, except I'm still feeling this conflict. And let me just say a few words, because I think we have to sort of hit both sides of this equation. We do have to thank industry. There are lots of people doing great stuff, and I don't mean to diminish that. We review the work in Access World regularly, and we try to be very honest about pointing out the good and the less good things that are being done. But we try to do it in a way, first of all, to give consumers honest information. Do you want to have this product or not? And secondly, we hope that it also helps industry do better and improve on things that need improving. It's no secret that the FCC has not vigorously enforced Section 255. It's no secret because it says so in your giant leap paper. FCC, for example, has not initiated any enforcement actions with respect to Section 255. So I've been saying that for a while. I'm glad to hear that the Commission says it. I recognize this is a new leadership, and I hope things will be different. I hope that we won't be saying that in another 10 years. I don't believe that enforcement is always the answer. I told you I was interested in solutions, and I meant that honestly. But I do believe, back to parenthood, that sometimes you do have to make clear what the expectations are. And this is certainly true with my kids, and I think it's true for most of us, and I think it's true with industry when it comes to laws and regulations. Sometimes you have to make clear that you mean it. If Section 255 says that telecommunications equipment and services shall be accessible, if readily achievable, by golly, that means something. And it really ought to mean something, and the only way it will mean something is if the only body that has enforcement responsibilities actually, once in a while, raises its hand and says, yes, we mean it, go to your room, time out. You didn't solve the problem. AFB did a survey of 500 individuals. We wanted to get a large enough survey of individuals with vision loss to hopefully make it relevant and nationally representative. Found that 350 of them, which is a lot. I'm going to do the percentage on that. Close to 2/3, I guess, have mobile phones. And the good news is 91% of them are satisfied with their ability to make phone calls. The less good news is that 20% of them, only 20% of them, are satisfied with their ability to text, and less than 10% satisfied with their ability to browse the web. Something is not working. Now, we can get into pointless, long arguments about whether Section 255 covers texting, and I know it surely doesn't cover browsing the web. But consumers are left scratching their head in puzzlement, wondering, why can I do this one thing on my phone pretty well, maybe, when in fact I can't do these other things that everyone else is doing? Virtually everyone in this world would tell you that texting is more or less a substitute for a voice phone call. It's a communication between two people. Walk through the whole definition of what a telecom connection is. They would say texting is that. The Commission hasn't decided that it is. Let's get on with it and decide. It is. And let's make sure that industry knows forthwith that it should be accessible. There should be no doubt about this. Why do people struggle with texting and browsing? What they told us, over 80% was because they couldn't read the display. I'm going to wrap up. In 2003, we talked about the Sweet 16. We said that the cell phones at that time is what we were focused on, should have keys that are identifiable by touch. There should be voice output of information on the display, and that there should be accessible documentation. I know I'm getting poked over here. That hasn't worked out all that well. More recently, we've added high contrast and magnification for people with vision loss as an area of focus. Last two things I want to say. Third-party development, the Mobile Speak and Nuance Talks and Verizon Talks, great stuff. Appreciate AT&T and Verizon for working to subsidize that on their phones, on some of their phones, not all. Appreciate the development of Oratio, which costs, unfortunately, more than the BlackBerry that it makes accessible costs. So I don't want to minimize it. On the other hand, I don't want people to lose the fact that these add-ons are expensive and they're only available for a few phones. When you talk to RIM, ask them which phones you can actually use Oratio on today. Let me wrap by saying, lastly, that we very much applaud Apple and Google for building in accessibility at no extra cost to people with disabilities and doing a pretty fair job of addressing some very challenging environments in the touchscreen environment to make that accessible. We applaud them, especially Apple, which has done a terrific job. And if you see folks with vision loss now, they are lovers of the iPhone. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everybody that's gone on before. This is really very, very informative for the Commission. I'm going to actually go back to Susan and then do you last, Lisa. Is that okay? Okay. So Susan Mazrui is she chairs the Board of Directors for the World Institute on Disability. She serves on boards of the U.S. Business Leadership Network and the Committee on Disability, Power, and Pride. She, in the past, served 2 terms on the FCC's Consumer Advisory Committee and was the 2002 Summit on Leading Diversity Corporate Fellow and inducted into the Spinal Cord Injury Hall of Fame in 2008. Susan also happens to be the Director of Public Policy of AT&T Services, where she works on disability-related public policy issues and serves as a liaison with national disability organizations for AT&T Services. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the FCC for having this very important meeting.
Can you clarify whether you're here on behalf of AT&T or
Oh, absolutely. That was my next line,
okay, good.
Which is I do want to make it perfectly clear that the opinions expressed today are that of the World Institute on Disability, not of AT&T. The World Institute on Disability was founded in 1983, and it works on a range of issues, including full inclusion, equal access to employment, economic security, and access to health care. So a range of things. We work in communities, and we work with countries. So why would the World Institute on Disability find this to be such an important issue? Every aspect of access in these forums is impacted by access to wireless. And there's 2 points. One, there's access to wireless, and there's expanding access with wireless. And we believe, especially internationally, that this access through wireless technologies can be tremendous and life-changing for people with disabilities and society-changing as well. We also believe at the World Institute on Disabilities that access to information and the technology that supports information may be perhaps the greatest civil rights challenge we have for people with disabilities in the 21st century. So it is absolutely critical. While I doubt that there is anyone in this room who would not be outraged if I told you that a person with a disability did not get equal access to services from a federal agency, could not purchase from businesses, or was not unable to fully socially engage in clubs and activities that led to employment, every single person in this room would be outraged. But the reality is, in the online world today, that is exactly what is happening. People with disabilities are not able to shop equally, they're not able to use full social networking tools, and they are not able to engage and participate in civic activities at the same rate. We as a society, those individuals with disabilities, individuals without disabilities, agencies, businesses, and organizations have to take the stand that this is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to discriminate against a class of people because of disability. It is not an easy challenge, though, and I don't want to minimize that because we will need to work together to provide the answers. So the biggest challenge that we see is one of attitudes. It is no longer acceptable to look at accessibility as something we'll get to down the road. Technology changes too quickly. And if we are always playing catch-up, we are not participating. And so when we're looking at the design, when we're looking at policies, when we're looking at best practices, we absolutely need to engage accessibility as part of the core values. And it is not going to work if we play catch-up. We also, though, have tremendous opportunities. Students today can access their textbooks. They can download them. They can read them on a portable device. I mean, I go back to the time when there were still people walking around with portable reel-to-reel players to try to catch up on their classes. It's tremendous advancements. A person who is deaf can compete in the workplace using the tools that are used to communicate by everyone and using tools that are specifically designed for people who are deaf. A person who has a mobility disability can access using some devices that are designed for people who have mobility disabilities and some devices and applications that are designed for people who just want to have a hands-free experience. And there's devices, and the power of the mobile commuting today is incredible. And the things that you see out here today are like on the top of the flagpole on Mount Everest and what could be done. There's phenomenal efforts that need to be taken as well. And it's not something that a single industry, a single organization, a single agency, or approach can be taken to resolve all these things. We have to look at what we're doing holistically. We have incredible challenges that are faced by people throughout the world today. Economically, the wireless devices today can provide incredible opportunities toward full inclusion and toward economic security, job development, but they need to be at reach economically, and they need to be at reach in terms of having access and understanding of the tools. We have to have access not only to the devices, but also to what the devices can provide. Because as programs are becoming adopted more widely, they're happening in a way that people with disabilities also need to have access to those technologies. So whether it's social networking or a new way of monitoring the way you're traveling. I'm sure there are a lot of people on the metro who would really like to know that they're just about to miss their stop by some alert that might work for someone who's deaf, for example. There's benefits across the board, but we need to work together to get to that point. We also think that there is opportunities that are provided by wireless devices today that should also be available online, and access to broadband is a critical thing. It's not going to be acceptable in the future to not have access to broadband, yet we look at the adoption rate of people with disabilities, and we look at non-adopters and the percentage of people with disabilities who are non-adopters. It's not good. So we also need to make sure that not only the devices and the technology is accessible, but where you're going to is accessible. So what's available online, what's available through services is out there. We also can't rely on old forms of monitoring and supporting accessibility. there definitely needs to be requirements. There needs to be a sense of you must do this, but there also needs to be a way of embracing new and innovative technologies. There are apps out there today who provide tremendous access. I met a woman with autism. She was 15 years old, so I think of her as a kid, but we'll say young woman, who, had I met on the street, honestly, I would have guessed had very little cognitive ability. She used a device that sat on a cell phone, and we had a conversation that went along the lines of, so what else would you like to see on this device? And her answer was word prediction. Now, this device makes it possible for her to travel. She does have augmentative communications devices, and clearly I needed an attitude shift, but these devices can act as either a replacement or a supplement for assistive technologies. And we believe at the World Institute on Disabilities that there's room for both, that there will always be the need for assistive technologies that address specific disability things or address what we call orphan disabilities, so low incidence disabilities. But we also need to have these devices that are available through apps that are accessible. The apps are a low cost, quick to get, quick to adopt thing. Now, on the flip side of that, we also need to get to people who are developing these wonderful applications and make sure that when they're developing it, they're doing it in a way that's accessible. Often, discrimination or lack of access is unintentional, but we need to make sure that we're reaching the folks who are designing the future and make sure that they have the basic expectation that accessibility will be provided. You would never release an application today and say, we've got it by voice, we're coming down with a visual display later, and here's what you do to sign in. You tab to the first field and write your first name. You tab to the second field and write your last name. Oh, wait a second, is that middle initial? Okay, as we go down 20 other things we're supposed to enter in. You would never have that happen. And we need to make sure that when this product or application is released, there's an expectation by the designers that this is going to provide access as well, and that you can log in and you can sign. You would never say, oh, we've got this great mobile device. It broadcasts videos. You can download a network television show and watch it. Oh, but the sound will come in a couple weeks. That's not acceptable. We need to take that as our own responsibility. We need to provide resources as organizations. We do not know enough what is out there and how well it works. I think AFB's Access World does a wonderful job. We need more of that. We need that across the board. We need, as individuals with disabilities, to understand what products are out there and what will work for us. We also need to be able to have influence into those design, and we need to help shape the development. And we need to expect the application developer community, the community of folks who work in the wireless industry, to also take proactive measures to make sure accessibility is built in so it's not added on. At some point, we want to get to the point where we can use everything, and it's just the course of things. It's business as usual. We need to get there, and we need to have companies take leadership roles. Finally, we need agencies to take responsibility as well, to share what they've learned. These challenges are not easy. The meeting today is probably one of the most accessible meetings that's out there in government today. It shouldn't be the exception. It should be the rule. And so we also challenge agencies that have figured out the solutions, who've worked with industry, who've worked with consumers, who found things that work, to share that across the board. We need to make sure that what's happening today is accessible throughout government so we can all participate. And then we need to share that with the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Our last speaker is Lise Hamlin, who is Director of the Public Policy and State Development Division of the Hearing Loss Association of America. She previously worked for the League for the Hard of Hearing and the Northern Virginia Resource Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Persons. She's HLAA's representative on the FCC's Consumer Advisory Committee, and also newly appointed to and on the FCC's Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council. She also represents HLAA on the Justice for All Action Network and several coalitions, including the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Alliance, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Consumer Action Network, and the Coalition of Organizations for Accessible Technology. She has been an instructor for TDI in their CEPIN program, which is the Community Emergency Preparedness Information Network. She serves on the Montgomery County Commission on People with Disabilities, and she was recognized in the past with a National Otacon Focus on People Award, a Spirit of SHHH Award, and the F. Michael Taft Award from the Human Rights Commission of Rockville, Maryland. Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Before I start my remarks, I just wanted to tell Paul, you were right. The women were laughing, and the guys were thinking, oh, my God, I hope my wife is not listening in. I might have to clean my closet. But I want to thank you all for having us here. Hearing Loss Association of America was founded in 1979 and provides information, education, and advocacy to support some 36 million Americans with hearing loss. HLLA has more than 200 chapters, 14 state organizations, and a headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland. Now, when I was looking to find out what I was going to speak about today, I kind of looked at what was going on with cell phones. In my research, I saw that over 4 million people in any given second are making a cell phone call around the world. In the United States in 2009, 89% of U.S. citizens use cell phones, and wireless revenues were increased 250 times between 2000 and 2009. So we have 79 billion people in 2009. Now, but the most important statistics I found was that 45% of teens say their social life would end without text messaging. Here's what's been said by many of my colleagues here, and it's true for people with hearing loss as well. We simply do not want to be left out. The teenager with hearing loss wants that text message too. The adult, and I use the text messaging too, it's a way for us to communicate. We need these cell phones, these mobile devices to be accessible. Now, for people who use residual hearing, and as Claude was talking about people who are deaf, I talked about our constituency as largely people who use their residual hearing, who use their voice on phones. And what we need are direct access to those cell phones. We need voice with high fidelity sound, a very clear signal, and sufficient boost to the volume. That's something we find often does not happen. We can't pump it up loud enough to actually hear it. We also need text, because there are times that people in my community cannot really hear on that cell phone, but if we could have text at the same time, then we could get the information we missed. And video also. If we had the whole thing, my dream is to have video, text, and voice in a message in a phone that I could use all at the same time, and that would be interactive. Now, as other people have said here, we are thrilled with what has been happening in cell phones, in mobile devices. We have seen an improvement that it does level the playing field, because we have had some access, and I'm happy I'm getting less complaints. I get a lot of consumer complaints as a director of public policy, but I've seen it go down. I've seen people get more access to different kinds of phones. But when I was tasked with providing the challenges for people with hearing loss, it was, let me count the ways. And that's an apt quote, because I think people with disabilities in general and people with hearing loss have a love-hate relationship with their mobile devices. They really love them when they work, and the technology is wonderful, but when it doesn't, it's hugely disappointing. Now, the first up, and Claude talked about this also, but also for people with hearing loss, the biggest challenge is emergency access. We want to be able to get a hold of emergency providers when we need them. And what I have found for people with hearing loss, it's not so much a matter of I can use my text, I can use my phone, I can use my mobile phone, get out, but then I can't hear what's coming back. So that's where that text and video would become really helpful and useful to someone like me. Can I get that information? And then also for emergency providers, emergency service managers, to get the information back to me. Now, I was really happy today to see LG has mobile devices where you can see captioning on them. So now if there's an emergency where I have to leave, where I have to go from my home and find shelter elsewhere, now I can take that little mobile device or a cell phone and have the captioning right there so I can get the newscasters and what's happening with a hurricane or tornado or wherever, so I can shelter in a safe place. That's hugely important and has not been available up to now. Before, when we were in analog days and I had a television set, I had to have a 13-inch television set or larger, and they weren't caption capable often, and they certainly weren't. You can't take a huge television to get that information you need. The next piece of that is that we also need communities to get on board because they might have a local community putting out an emergency message that's not captioned. So we need everybody to work together to make sure that accessibility goes right on down the line. But I'm going to talk about something even a little bit more prosaic than that. Another challenge for me and people with hearing loss is actually finding a hearing aid compatible cell phone. Just finding them. If I go to the store, there's a problem in the store. I actually recently got a cell phone myself, and when I went to store, there were some stores that had huge numbers of phones, and I could test them. But in other stores, they had 3 or 4, and the guy was taking it out of his pocket to show me, and well, okay, was it usable with my hearing aid? Did the salesperson even know that he had to turn on the telecoil aspect of that phone for it to work with me? Now, I didn't know. I didn't even have that information for a long time, and if I didn't have it and he didn't have it, then I'm saying, oh, well, I can't use this phone. So for people with hearing loss, we tell them they need to go to the store to try it because it's complicated. You have a hearing aid that might cause interference with a phone. And I can't tell you, even if it has a high rating, we have a rating system now of M for microphone and T for telecoil, up to 4. So you have a M3, T3, sounds good, but will it work with my hearing aid? I have no idea. I've got to test it. If I don't have stores where I can test it and I don't have knowledgeable people there, I won't get access. Now, what about going online? I did that too. And I'm here to say that there are some very good service providers who put a lot of information out there and have a lot of good discussions for people even who don't know too much about their hearing loss, may have aged into it, don't know about M and T ratings, and they have that information there. But there are other providers who do not do that, and they're the large ones too. And I'd like to name names. Can I name names? I'm very unhappy at some of the providers who have 3 or 4 sets who make it very difficult to find the information. So now I can't even know where to start, and then I can't even get to the store. When I get to the store, I can't test it. Makes it very hard for people with hearing loss to be able to do that. The other piece for us is there are people in our community who go right for, just as somebody else mentioned, that cutting-edge technology often helps us because there's more features that we can use, but sometimes it doesn't help us because what happens is, for example, and there I will mention it, is the Apple phone, for example, which I love because Apple phone supports things that I need, for example, caption telephone. So I can get through the relay system and use my caption telephone. But I won't buy the iPhone because it's not hearing aid compatible. In fact, it causes huge interference. Why should that phone come out? It's been out for 3 years and has not found a way to make it hearing aid compatible. And even the Droid, which we also love, when it first came out, didn't have a telecoil rating. And now I'm happy to say that it does have an M3, T3 rating. So when I see the Droid can do it, I don't understand why the iPhone can't and why people have to use some kind of device to take it far away so that it doesn't get close to their ear. That will cause all that interference. Again, I have to emphasize the quality and the quantity of the sound is hugely important. People have a misconception that, well, if you can't hear on the phone, why do you need good quality? I'm here to tell you that good, high-fidelity sound is important because I'm not struggling to hear through all the noise that can come through the line. And I know hearing people are beginning to see that, too. We'd like to see a movement on that. Telecoil interconnectivity, we'd like to see more and more of that, because we know that once somebody has a telecoil in their hearing aid, they can use it for their telephone, they can use it for using an assistive device today to hear, for many other situations. So it makes the hearing aid hugely important. And as I mentioned, the caption, being able to access relay is hugely important. So accessing, for us, caption telephone service is important. In the future, what we'd like to see is something, as I said, my dream is real-time text and video and voice, and clear, crystal clear voice that I can increase the sound on. I'd love to see that in the future. Telecoil compatibility, where I don't have to worry about interference. Simultaneous voice and text display, simultaneous video and audio, ability to add text so I can text in as I'm talking. So if somebody I'm talking to is also hard of hearing, I can add in the words they missed, or they can add the words that I missed. And ability to connect to the internet relay services, as I mentioned. I think there are solutions out there, as I say, and other people have said, it's wonderful, the solutions that people are here have come up with and what we've been doing. We're here to applaud the work that has been done, and we looked, as I say, not to have it be a retrofit, but have it be at the design stage, when in the beginning, where everybody's thinking about how this product is accessible right from the get-go. So I thank you.
Thank you. All of the panel is the information that you provided has been enormously invaluable. You've given us a lot of terrific information, pointers on what needs to be accessible, and we're going to be taking this back as we continue to develop policy. We now have a few questions for the panelists.
So, as the lead up to my question, let me tell you what I think I've heard from you today in terms of what we at the FCC need to do. First, we need to set the bar high with respect to expectations. I think almost every panelist made this point, starting with Randy. Second, positive reinforcement for companies that are doing the right thing and making accessibility. Not sufficient, but I think from Paul's story, we understand that it's necessary. Consequences for failure to comply with our rules and with the statute. And that's something that Karen and I can take up also with the Enforcement Bureau. What Claude said that struck me was that we need to think very broadly, that it's about wireless. It's not just about cell phones and mobile devices, but wireless, especially in the future, will be about machines talking to machines. It will be about a communication system that goes far beyond the personal devices that we're using, and we need to start thinking about that now in order to make sure that those systems are accessible. And finally, a point that I think Susan made, which is we need to model the right behavior. If accessibility is important, then government agencies need to be accessible. And when we figure out what we can do to be accessible, we need to share that information with others. And I was very struck also by Lisa's very concrete discussion of what works and what doesn't work, which leads me to think that we have to master the details of this information. Okay, so that's what I heard from you guys at a high level. And now the question really is, what do we need to do? What's our role? I think the paper that Elizabeth Lyle wrote, that the team wrote on disabilities issues around broadband, lays out a pretty good agenda for us. What else do we need to be doing, and what are the top priorities? Should we go in reverse, maybe starting with Lisa first?
Yeah, or anybody who would like to answer, just raise your hand. Lisa, do you have an answer?
Okay. Well, I'll go first. I think even this is really reiterating what Paul said. It needs to be an issue of enforcement. There are rules out there that are already, there's plenty of rules, and there's plenty of work we can do just enforcing what we have on the books. There's been things on hold for a long time that we haven't seen worked on. For me, it's also a matter of when I look to the website and I find that I can't get the information that I need, that's a reporting issue, and wonder if, in fact, the enforcement needs to be stronger. You get reports, I don't know how often now. I did look it up, but it managed to leave my brain. But you have reporting. But let's see them actually. Are the reports, one of the problems I have is when I go to the website, I'll see 5 phones there, or if I go to the store, and the guy will look up on the website and says, okay, these are hearing aid compatible, but they're no longer models that are usable. So we have information here on our website that's old that we're saying is supposed to be up to date but isn't. So that reporting and then enforcing that reporting to me is huge. And then also, as I said, there are some things that we had filed for example, the de minimis request, where we're really looking at the issue of, well, Apple is a huge corporation. Should they have 3 years to come up to speed, or 4, or how many years is it going to take? Are they allowed to do that? We need to have rulings on some of these things we've requested.
Thank you.
We're just going to,
Yep, go ahead.
did I turn?
I think if you start talking.
Just raise your hand.
I guess you have the control. Okay, so information on specific products and features, it's sort of something the FCC can do. It's certainly something the FCC can encourage. We hear this all the time from individuals. What's available? What they get too often from websites and companies is, we have many phones with accessibility features, but not very much specifics on which phone actually does what. And a lot of times you can't find the things in stores, even if you have a cell phone kiosk or store nearby, to be able to test to see whether the keys work the way you want them to. The display is something you can read. Whether there's speech output, chances are there's not, but to be able to test that. So something that would be very helpful, and I frankly think it would help everybody, industry as well as the consumer community, is much more specifics on what exactly is available and what the features are exactly for various disability categories. The other problem, of course, is that products are constantly changing. We have this all the time with Access World. It's because it's on the web, people read old issues, and I shudder about that because they're reading about phones that are long gone. In terms of what the other things the FCC can do, I think I've already said. Do what you can. You can strengthen 255. I believe you have the authority to cover messaging without any doubt, but you should determine that and move on it one way or the other. Because if you can't do it, then we need to put more pressure on Congress to make that clear. Take action to enforce. You have the responsibility or the authority, and I would say the responsibility to take enforcement action. We helped 14 individuals file complaints, all alleging essentially the same thing. They couldn't get access to the displays on their phone. They couldn't do text messaging. The keys, in many cases, were inadequate, did not meet what they believed to be the standard of accessible by touch or textually identifiable. And virtually nothing came about from that. So, if you need proof of pattern, we filed it. We helped individuals file that in August of 2007. I realize those complaints are stale, but the points are still valid. And if need be, I'm sure we can round up individuals to do that again. But I don't think we should have to. It seems to me that the pattern is quite clear, and you have the responsibility to take the authority and responsibility to take action. And I would say, and I made this point in the paper, your enforcement. I laud it, and I'm guessing because it's focused on the needs of consumers for so long, which is fine. But the enforcement tends to look at individual redress rather than access. And in its wisdom, Congress gave only the Federal Communications Commission responsibility to enforce 255. We've got nowhere else to go. And so if 255, which says broad things about accessibility, doesn't say individuals shall have their phones replaced, or individuals shall get their bills taken care of if their phone isn't accessible. No, it says products need to be accessible. So your enforcement actions should look at accessibility as a whole, not just individual redress. And the last thing that I think would be interesting to explore is this issue of compatibility, which maybe was something, if I were redoing 255, I would say was maybe not such a good idea, because what it has allowed is the development of this third-party software that's great, but it's, as I said, it's at a cost that is exceeding, in most cases, the equipment that it's making accessible. And so I would look at that and say, this software like Mobile Speaks is commonly used for only one purpose, and that's to get access to a cell phone. So it's not really commonly used by people with disabilities. It's commonly used for that specific purpose. And I think we ought to take a look at that and see whether or not 255 shouldn't require companies to, in fact, provide accessibility to those great third-party screen readers as part of a licensing or other scheme that the company is responsible for, not laying that cost off as a disability tax on consumers with disabilities.
Thank you, Paul. I want to add to Ruth's 5 summary points with a sixth one that I hear you saying, and I've heard other people saying on this panel, which is that it's necessary to get in on the ground floor, that you have to design, the companies need to really take seriously their responsibilities of designing products and services with access features right at the start of the design process, because it's expensive to retrofit later on, and because chances are that if there are solutions later on, these may not be as good as they would have been had they been incorporated into the products and services. Susan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's some very good first steps. I think Elizabeth's report was outstanding. I think that having a accessibility and innovation forum will be good, but it's a first step. There needs to be a strategic analysis of the industry as a whole, technology as it is today, and current trends as it relates to people with disabilities. And when technologies are coming down and there are no known solutions, there are no standards in place, then it's the FCC's responsibility to help address and focus attention on that as well. And I think that that's something that you can do. I think we can't play catch-up, but I think that getting ahead means really doing a good assessment, and we haven't seen that. I think we need to have better partnerships and more thorough partnerships and validation about accessibility, because right now we don't know what it means unless we have AFB or a specific organization that targets, and that tends to be not every disability and not cross disabilities. So we need to have a basic understanding and some form of information that we can get to and make informed purchases, whether that's done at the FCC or it's done through working with requirements from service providers and manufacturers or assistive technology folks. I don't know. But you need to get ahead and find out where we are today. Look at the trends that are coming down, and do we have standards for this? Do we need standards for this? Can we convene industry and say, we're concerned about this. We would like to have you find a solution. And we'd like you to work with consumers to do that. I think the FCC does a good job of focusing attention when it identifies what the issues are, and I think you're in a good position to do that as well.
Susan, just one question. When you said partnerships among whom? What entities need to be part of those partnerships?
I think that depending on the issue, you're looking at a range. And, ADA now is not like the built environment's kind of ADA 2.0. We need to look at developing the relationships with consumer organizations, with the developer communities, with manufacturers, service providers. It's across the board, and it depends on the specific issue. If you're looking at, real-time text is a significant challenge. If you're going to look at that, you need to assess it systematically and work with the partners in it to make sure that there's folks in industry who work with the technology and the testing, that the consumers can validate what's going on and so that the solutions that are suggested work. But it's developing those contacts and the commitment. When we see progress, we see commitment from multiple parties to find a solution rather than to debate whether they need to. And I think you can encourage that partnership and that working together.
And I think that you will be hearing a lot more about this later on today, because a lot of this is in the plan that Elizabeth and others have put together with respect to going forward. A lot of your concerns about being able to get additional information, again, as I started, that's really a focus of this commission in terms of transparency, empowering consumers to get the information that they need. So Elizabeth's going to be talking about some things that the commission is going to be doing in that regard, as well as facilitated dialogues and other efforts at getting industry and consumers in the same room more often to develop solutions. And understand the issues better.
And I would just add the caution that sometimes we get together as groups and say we need to work together and this is important, but there needs to be a plan afterward and strategic actions that are taking place. And those actions need to be highlighted and publicized.
We agree. Do you want to...
Why don't we let Claude?
Okay, we're going to let Claude and Randy, if you could just make very brief statements, and then we're going to actually shift. Ruth has a couple of announcements that she wants to make, and I may have one or two questions after that.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Karen. I think we all have to realize that providing access is not an art. It's a science. And I want to emphasize accountability on the part of industry as well as the part of government as well as consumer groups. Consumers need to tell the industry and the government what we expect to see in the future, whether it would be with pagers, PDAs, hearing aid compatible cell phones and the like. Any other wireless machine that might come our way. And a while ago I mentioned that we need to think of ourselves as that we need to be considered in the beginning, not at the end. And that means dealing with us and talking to us, maybe setting up focus groups. Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile have done a great job with consumer focus groups. We have also, TDI has sat on various advisory councils where we meet quarterly, for example, and review their work, specifically on the developments that they have done in regards to accessible phones, pagers, and so forth. They've done a wonderful job, specifically AT&T I was speaking of. Verizon also works with us quarterly in conference calls. I believe there's 5 of us that represent consumer groups from the disability community who works with Verizon to review their ongoing works. Consumers do need to keep the FCC informed if something in the marketplace is wrong or is going well. We also need to work with the industry to say, hey, don't forget to involve us from the get-go. And when we're not happy with things, we need to communicate with the industry as well, not just let things go. I again commend the government and the industry for making possible where we are right now. We do have new technology out there. We just want to make sure that we are not continuing to lag behind. As Susan said, technology changes so rapidly that we just cannot continue to play catch-up. I don't want us to experience another, quote, digital divide or another broadband divide or so forth. Thank you.
Randy? Randy, do you have something to add?
Yes, I do. Thank you. With the deaf-blind people here in the United States, there are times that we can't even walk into a storefront to pick a phone or test a phone device that we might like. We've got to find more accessible equipment, though. It has to be specialized equipment, and again, cost is an issue with that. Then there's the additional issue of learning how to use that equipment when it's so specialized. That's proving to be very difficult for us to date. There's computer abilities, there's skills and technologies involved in using those devices that are tough. We're looking at some possible ways where we can see more government support, more research. We'd like to see more studies on developing equipment. We'd like to be working with the companies out there. There's a device called Telebraille that's well known in the deaf-blind community. The research and development for that started with the US government support. We have deaf-blind communication devices now that would never have been developed without government support. So what we see is that when companies are cooperating with the government, things are possible. So we'd like to see that continue with more accessible technologies. And be that a phone, be that computers or other devices. Really, what I want to see is help in that capacity. We have such limited options at this stage. There are people out there who, quite frankly, have no options. Thank you for that support.
Thank you all. I'm sorry to say I have another commitment, so I'm going to run. I think Karen wants to keep you all here and ask you more questions while she has you. But I really appreciate, I have learned a great deal, and I look forward to working with all of you in the days to come.
Thank you. And Ruth, I really want to thank you because Ruth really pushed ahead and insisting on this forum taking place, and I think it's been invaluable. So thank you. I'm not letting you go so fast. I know that people are hungry, so I won't keep you long, but I had a couple of other questions that I wanted to ask you because, again, your expertise is invaluable. It's clear that going forward, it's going to be a balance of a lot of different things. It's going to be a balance of, as you've said, partnerships, working together, facilitated dialogues, having the industry and the consumers sit in the same room and try to find solutions. There will also be a component for policy making and new rules and regulations. And then the other component is the complaint process, which is really, if everything worked up front, that would be only the last resort. If everybody complied, then really you need fewer complaints. However, it's clear that complaints are going to be playing a significant role, at least for the foreseeable future. Do any of you have thoughts on how we can better our complaint process with respect to handling complaints for wireless services? I see you smirking, Paul. Besides responding to the complaints, but I'm talking about.
Well, that did leap to mind.
I understand. I left it open, but I'm really talking about in terms of the filing of complaints by consumers and just general procedures.
This is Lise Hamlin. I think that it is important to make it as easy as possible, as consumer-friendly as possible, because consumers love to complain to each other, but have trouble. I think they're intimidated by a lot of what they see in the complaint process. I think some complaint forms are beginning to get easier. I'm hoping that the reboot and the whole broadband thing will also. I really love that website because it feels very consumer friendly, and the idea of putting a comment, like a blog-like comment, I think is much more friendly to consumers than filing a formal complaint where there's a line that says, okay, my attorney's name is. It pushes people away and think, well, maybe I'm not doing this right. So I like the idea of what you're doing with the reboot, and I think that might work for other complaint processes as well.
Again, you're in for some nice surprises this afternoon. I don't know how many of you can stay, but you'll be happy to know that we're moving in that direction.
I think the FCC has been relying on people going to the FCC, and I don't know that a lot of people feel comfortable going to the government. I think that there's often a perception that their complaint is going to get lost. So I say two things. One is obviously make the process as simple as possible, but also go out into the community and find out what are you hearing consistently and look for trends, because that's really going to cause more system change. An individual can find a solution that's okay for them, but the real point of 255 is to try to change the whole environment and to change what's accessible across the board so that other people aren't hitting it. The other challenge, I think, for consumers around complaints is if you don't know what's out there and you don't understand the value, you can't complain. And so if I don't know that I can shop from my phone or identify groceries or do other things, I'm not going to be as dissatisfied. And my adoption rate's going to be lower, and you see that with broadband. And the other piece is if you can't afford the technology, you can't complain about it either because you don't have it in your hand to use. And so anything you can do along those lines to get that basic access will help you understand the complaint and the issues.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you. That's very helpful. One more question. As you know, Section 255 of the Communications Act is based on a product-by-product approach, which means that companies have to make an effort to make each and every product accessible if readily achievable. That law was enacted more than 10 years ago at a time that perhaps there was not as much reliance on software that can tailor individual devices to individual people more readily. Do you see changes in technology that should suggest that there should be a change in the focus? Should there be a change in terms of looking across a product line, perhaps working with companies to figure out whether certain products that have certain features, functions, and prices, or rather a range of features, functions, and prices that should be accessible versus trying to incorporate access for everyone in every single product? And I realize this is not an easy question, but have you given any thought to this?
I could
Paul?
jump in. Paul Schroeder AFB. I've already said that I do think that one step that could be taken is to look at this compatibility piece of Section 255. You know, the prong is accessible if readily achievable, and if not, compatible if readily achievable, and compatible with customer equipment commonly used by or whatever, essentially AT. And I think looking at that now makes some sense. When that was written in the mid-'90s, I'm not sure any of us knew precisely what that would mean. Some of us in this room had a hand in writing that language. And, I think our hope was and our expectation was that we might see products that would interact with things like the note taker that I'm carrying here. And indeed, to some degree, that has happened. This is a thing with a Braille display on it, and it's part of actually what makes telecommunications accessible for people who are deaf and blind. So in that instance, compatibility makes sense in the way it was intended in 255. But as I said, for mobile speaks, mobile magnifier from Code Factory or Nuance Talks or even Oratio, those products exist to give access to those pieces of software exist to give access to a specific product, a specific cell phone. There wouldn't be another reason to use those. You wouldn't carry around Code Factory. You don't plug it into a computer for other purposes. And so we should probably be looking at how to find ways to encourage, if not outright require, that those products be incorporated through licensing or some other means, so that the cost of doing it is borne by the telecom carrier or manufacturer. I have to say that I generally don't think manufacturers are doing enough. Apple and Google somewhat excluded. But developers of the handsets, to my view, aren't doing enough to build accessibility in. Too much of that is being relied upon by this third-party software and the carriers like AT&T and Verizon making sure that happens. And while the carriers are far from perfect, they are bearing a lot of that cost, either through subsidy or through meeting consumer expectations. And they also struggle because a lot of the phones that people want to use the software on aren't available, or the software doesn't work on them. So I think you framed it well. I mean, the product approach might not actually have been such a workable approach 10 years ago, product by product. Now it seems a very workable approach as we've moved to systems where third-party software is fairly routinely added for various purposes. And obviously, mobile apps are the thing of the day for Apple and Google, and I gather maybe BlackBerry as well, and certainly will be true in other environments too. And so in that environment, it seems less of a problem for accessibility to be incorporated through other means. And so maybe a product-by-product approach really has much more resonance now than it ever did. Having said that, in conclusion, I stand by what I said before. If you're an individual with vision loss wanting a fairly low-end phone, good luck, because you won't find one with accessibility built into it to give you access to the display to be able to fully, and I don't mean just, one tier of access to maybe get to your phone book. I mean fully accessing the display and the functions of that phone. I defy you to find one. There might be one or two, but we have trouble finding them, and then they go away when we do find them. LG and Samsung, I think, have done some good work in that area, but it's been tough, and those phones don't stick around long.
Claude, did you have a response as well?
I heard somewhere that application development, third-party application development, every day is actually more than cheeseburgers sold by McDonald's. There are more applications developed every day by third-party entities than McDonald's sells cheeseburgers. So, for example, the COAT organization has proposed to Congress where the industry and the government would work together on a nationwide or a national database, a national clearinghouse, which would be extremely important. That would help us know which applications would meet our accessibility needs. We would know which applications don't meet our needs, which ones would meet our needs, which ones would apply to the deafblind community's needs, the deaf individuals' needs, hard of hearing community's needs. So, industry, if you sell us pagers and cell phones, we would like you to sell us devices comparable to what you sell people without disabilities. Because I want to have a phone that would allow me to download all the cool applications that are out there, not just some basic thing. And that requires you to have a dialogue with the consumer organizations. Even look at CTIA. Consumer groups rely on CTIA to meet with us, to revive, maybe we could revive their quarterly or biannual meetings that we used to have with consumer groups, because that worked really well back in the day. So we would like to see that revived. And then with the answers to those questions, we can help the FCC with their system, help it really basically benefit all of us, not to the advantage or disadvantage of certain groups of individuals.
One last question. There's been some talk of putting accessibility in the cloud. Would any of you like to respond to that? Go ahead, Susan.
I think there's tremendous potential, and I think there's tremendous risk. I think until we have the attitude that accessibility is part of everyday life, there's some degree of risk with that. I think we can't walk away from it. In large part, it will be a large part of the future. How much we know, we'll find out over time. There needs to be investment in that. But I think that the idea that if you just throw it out there, it'll be fixed, has not borne well for the disability community. We've been fortunate in some cases, but it certainly is not something that I, as a person with a disability, would want to rely on as a safety net.
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been, I'm sure everybody here would agree that this has been extraordinarily helpful. Are there any questions from the public? Okay, I think people are hungry. So, but before you go, I do have one more announcement. First of all, I want to thank you all. Again, we understand that it takes time to prepare for panels like this, and that the FCC keeps on calling on you. I apologize to say that this will not be the last time. As we move forward, we're going to need a lot of help, maybe not in formal settings, but certainly in a variety of different, as you put it, partnerships and collaborative efforts to try to reach solutions. Before we break for lunch, I do want to take a few minutes to let you know that the technology exhibits and demonstrations, I want to reiterate that they're being provided graciously by a number of companies here today. Again, I want to announce their names: Apple, LG, Looktel, Motorola, Research in Motion, Verizon Wireless, and the WGBH National Center for Accessible Media. And we encourage you to examine the technologies, and in addition, please provide feedback to the vendors. I also want to thank the interpreters and captioners for handling this morning's accommodations. We do have a full agenda this afternoon. It begins at 2 o'clock. So that will be moderated by Renee Crittenden, if you could stand up, of the Wireless Bureau, and Pam Gregory of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. So enjoy your lunch. There's a cafe downstairs. There are a couple places in the area. Still not a whole lot. And I think, upstairs. I'm sorry. The cafe is upstairs. I should know that by now. And Starbucks around the corner and a couple of other sandwich places around in the area. We'll see you back here at 2.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon and welcome to our panelists. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. This is the second half of our workshop on expanding disability access with wireless technologies. I am Renee Rowland Crittenden. I'm in the Wireless Bureau as Senior Counsel, and next to me is Pam Gregory in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. During this portion of our workshop, we're going to be looking at trends and technologies and also recommendations. We are going to be broadcasting this panel, as with the first panel, on the internet. So if you do have questions, we ask you to go to accesswireless@fcc.gov. And for those of you that are here in the Commission meeting room, please feel free to raise your hand when we get to questions. And if you have a question, we will be sending around question cards and a pen for you. Each of the panelists will have 10 minutes and then a 1-minute warning. And I will introduce each panelist before their presentation, and then they can present, and then I'll do the next panelist. We will be accommodating, though, one of our panelists, Jonas Klink, who is with Google, is coming to us via video. So he has an appointment that he has to leave for, so we were going to let him present first and ask him questions, and then we'll let him go. So let me go ahead and introduce Jonas. Jonas is the accessibility product manager of Google. He has been with the company since 2006, and he has worked with defining and influencing the incorporation of accessibility in every stage of Google products, from design to Q&A. He promotes, he provides guidance, and he performs relevant R&D to give every full access and equivalent user experience. His work can be experienced in products such as Google Chrome, Gmail, Toolbar, Google Apps, and many others. In addition to his work with Google, Jonas has been involved in standards and community efforts for a broad range of various access needs. So please welcome Jonas.
Thank you, Renee. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, wonderful. Let me switch to my presentation now that you've all seen me in this exciting meeting room over in California. So I'll cut right to the chase here with my presentation. I'm really honored to be here today, and I'm really glad that the FCC has organized this workshop in a topic that is very near and dear to me. As Renee said, I've worked in the field of accessibility for quite some time, both at Google and prior to joining the company as well. So I put together a little presentation, and I'm more than happy to take any questions after the presentation before I unfortunately have to leave a little bit early. So as Renee said, my name is Jonas Klink, and I'm the accessibility product manager here at Google, which means essentially that I am dealing with any type of strategic question related to accessibility in our products, our platforms, and in the mobile and wirelessware as well. I'd like to point out at once that I'm not a policy expert, so I know that there are other distinguished people on this panel that are much more suited than I am to answer policy questions. And my team in Washington, D.C. Are also great in answering the policy type questions. So who am then I here talking about accessibility? So as Renee said, I've been with Google for the past 4 years. I come from a computer science background, originally from far off Sweden, where I'm now bombing in the heat of California instead, which is a pleasant change, of course. I've done research prior to my professional work on education and technology, primarily for the visually impaired, but I've done a lot of work since, both with people with hearing disabilities, mobility, cognitive impairments, really across the field, and that's what my position and my team covers. I've been involved with hands-on work. I used to be an engineer, and I worked on a wide range of products, all the way from Toolbar to Chrome, Android, and on the web application side, starting with Gmail, apps, YouTube, Blogger, Transit. If it has the Google label on it, there's a fair chance that I've been somewhat involved in the accessibility solutions for those products. So just briefly, what is Google Access Engineering, and what are we trying to do here? So essentially, the information access, as all of you know, is really core to Google's mission. And we're striving to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. And that obviously pretty nicely fits with the accessibility definitions that you have in the community. And my team is really working with the understanding of two key issues, and that's how differently abled users and people with different setups, because you don't have to be a disabled user to take advantage of some of these solutions that are out there, can access information in an effective way, not just have some basic access, but actually pleasantly be able to interact with these technology solutions. And then the second part, which obviously how my team works, is making sure that the developers that we have here at Google and in the community can enable applications to function with the various solutions that are out there. And I'd like to point out a resource that we have, google.com/accessibility, which essentially summarizes all of the work that we put out there, and it also has a feedback form in case somebody has any type of feedback or questions. Feel free to send it along to us. So why are we doing this, and why are we putting a lot of focus on accessibility? Well, apart from, as I said, that it's important for us to our mission, it's also important to a lot of people out there. And the graph that I'm showing on screen right now is a pretty interesting comparison that my team put together, kind of comparing some of the top largest groups of disabilities out there in the world in terms of internet population with, say, the top 15 languages, which is obviously another piece that we are very interested in at Google. So you can see from this graph that color deficiency is up there with English and Chinese just ahead of it, and then poor vision, poor dexterity is up there along with Japanese, Spanish, German, and French, which are really huge languages on the internet. And being from Sweden, I'm personally very glad that it didn't get pushed off my diagram as well. We just made it on there. It's a small group, but we're out there. So obviously we're here to talk about the wireless field. So I wanted to give a very brief overview of what we've done recently for Android, which is our mobile platform. So the mobile access for Android comes essentially in two flavors. One is what we call the ice-free shell, which is both a home screen but also a suite of applications that are designed to make it easier to interact with the touch screen of the Android phones. It's all built on an open source text-to-speech library, which is out there on any phone that's running Android 1.6 or later. It comes with an alternative ice-free home screen, where you can essentially replace the default home screen with something that I can show on the earlier slide that looks like this. So wherever you put your finger down is home, and then you have a number of shortcuts laid out in a 3x3 grid around the center piece. We have a similar dialer as well, which makes dialing on the touchscreen a lot easier, we found at least, by using these gestures in this 3x3 grid. So this is kind of a little bit of a different approach. We also have more traditional access built in on the phone. Under settings and accessibility, you'll find a number of accessibility solutions led by TalkBack, which is our screen reading software. It's relying on an API that's been available, as I said, in the Android phones since 1.6, which is called Donut. We're making it to Froyo now in our course through all the desserts that we put out there. It has spoken access for any type of standard UI elements, and there are free voices available for some of the top languages: English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish as well. Along with TalkBack, there's also two other smaller but interesting called Kickback and Soundback. And Kickback gives you haptic feedback. It vibrates in various scenarios where you're moving around in the UI to give a sense of where you are and allow for cognitive mapping of the screen. Soundback is non-spoken auditory feedback and kind of gives dings as you're moving from screens and through various pieces of the UI. And I realized that this is a very, very fast overview of these accessibility solutions. So again, let me point to the google.com/accessibility, or if you go to a YouTube channel called Eyes Free as one word, then you'll be able to see or listen to instructional videos on how to use and interact with all of these pieces that I described. So as the last piece, I mentioned briefly, if there are any developers in the room, there is an API available on Android. It's all open source, and I won't go into a lot of these details, but essentially, if you're not happy with the basic feedback that you get from TalkBack and some of the other solutions that I mentioned, as a developer, you can kind of customize your application and make sure that you augment the spoken output using these APIs to be even better. And obviously, that's something that might not be as well known, and a lot of people are not developers, but this is something that we've seen adds a lot of value to certain applications, which are a little bit trickier to interact with. So just to summarize a little bit, again, what my team is focusing on and believe is important in the accessibility field. Collaboration and openness, which is part of why we're here today, is something that I personally is very, very keen to expand on. And Google in general, trying to be as transparent on our accessibility solutions as we possibly can. And if anyone has any questions, has any recommendations or anything, feel free to pass them along to us, and we'll be happy to interact with you. Customization, mentioned that a little bit, is really key in all of these applications. Not everyone with disability access have the same type of needs, so we can provide the tools, we can provide the muscle from our side, but we really want to make it easy for everyone to make it their own. Spinning on that thread, configuring once, making it work everywhere. Something that we're seeing with the accessibility moving to the cloud, to the internet, is the nice part that a lot of these offerings, a lot of the assistive technology can also move to the web. So potentially in some near future, you can see a login situation where you'll log in and you'll just have all of your configurations available, all of your text-to-speech and whatever your needs might be. So that's kind of a glimpse into the future where I see this go. And just in general, make accessibility easy for everyone to add. You can legislate, you can put a lot of open standards in place, which is all great and necessary work. But what we're trying to do here is to again give the muscle and make it really easy for anyone who builds these types of applications that are not accessibility experts to add these critical pieces to their applications. So with that, I thank you for listening to these quick and opening remarks, and I'm happy to point you to my email and the google.com/accessibility if you have any questions that doesn't get answered here today.
Hi, this is Pam Gregory speaking. For those of you who weren't able to see it, Jonas's email address is klink, K-L-I-N-K, @google.com. Just wanted to make sure that was available to everyone. And I do have a question for you, Jonas. In terms of harmonization, international harmonization, are you working with the W3C mobile initiative?
So we haven't worked specifically with the mobile initiative. We have been working closely. In fact, one of my team members it has been one of the co-chairs, Loretta Guarino, putting out the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So we work very closely with the W3C through those means, and one of our members are also representing us on the W3C. But no, we haven't worked specifically with the mobile branch.
And a question for me, Jonas. Earlier today on the panel, one of the concerns that was raised by some of the panelists were what they thought were inadequate training of the salespeople that are selling some of these products, even if they have great integrated features, as well as sort of difficulty figuring out how to use the equipment, whether it's on their websites or otherwise. Can you talk a little bit about how Google goes about training in terms of for consumers and your sales folks as well?
Right. That's a great question, and it's a concern that I've encountered before. To be quite frank, I'm quite aware that the documentation that we have for the end users needs expanding, and I'm personally working on that right now. In addition to these videos, we need to have a lot more hands-on guidelines. We have tried to be as transparent as we can, but the trouble with producing the documentation is that the technology changes so fast, so it's kind of a moving target. But that's not an excuse that we should leave the end users behind. But you're definitely going to see expanded guidelines for end users along with these videos. But the videos are actually really great if people want to try them out, because it's a really hands-on experience. And if you can't see the video, listening to it is a really enlightening experience as well. In terms of training salespeople and so on, we've been trying to put out the message that is essentially twofold. One being that there are a wealth of form factors and handsets out there that offers the Android platform, and not all of them are optimal for somebody, for instance, who has a visual impairment. So we're trying, both with working with the community, with organizations like the AFB that just put out an article of hands-on experiences with the phone, to spread the word that certain phones will not have a physical keyboard. If you want to be able to use the physical keyboard, choosing the Droid over the Nexus, for instance, is a pretty natural choice. And the second piece that I mentioned in my presentation is that it's important for consumers to know that Android 1.6 is kind of the magic number, because that's where the text-to-speech became default on the platform. So those are really two key pieces that we're trying to educate both salespeople and end users to make sure they ask for those things. But other than that, you'll see a lot more resources coming soon in terms of tutorials and guidelines.
Jonas, we do have a question from the audience from Jamal Mazrui.
Thanks. Am I being heard? Okay. I work as a technology specialist here at the Commission, and I also happen to be blind. I'm particularly interested in what perspective you might have on how the CAPTCHA problem can be solved, and I would think that Google might be able to play a leadership role in this area. As you know, that this is one of the biggest barriers for people who are blind accessing the web, because websites have a legitimate interest in making sure that it's a human and not a spam bot. But for the most part, the mechanism has been completely visually oriented. And to the extent that there have been alternatives like listen to this and type in these characters, often it's very hard to tell through the audio what to type. And I wonder if some kind of API could be developed that would be freely available to any website developer, by which they could implement an accessible CAPTCHA solution.
Thanks, Jamal. It's a very interesting question, and I'm smiling here on my side because it's an area that I fought a lot of battles in personally. I even started in my research back in the day doing some research in this topic. The current CAPTCHA situation is horribly broken. I completely agree. What Google is offering right now is what you mentioned as an alternative to the visual CAPTCHA, having an auditory CAPTCHA. But as you say, it's always a race between people with malicious intent trying to break these and security of them and the usability of these CAPTCHAs. And that applies both to the auditory one, which I agree is hard to use, and the visual one, which I myself, who is not blind, have troubles a lot of times on various websites that I encounter for sign-up scenarios. Google also recently acquired reCAPTCHA, which is one of the biggest CAPTCHAs out there in the industry. So I don't have a magic bullet for you today, but I can promise you that we're well aware of the situation and that there's ongoing research on our side trying to produce something that's better. So currently, the auditory alternative is there. If you still cannot solve it, all of these sites have a link that's visible to screen reader users so that you can access a different help center page that gives you instructions on how to contact our help centers, and they'll manually create an account for you. I realize that is obviously not a process that we want to stick with. It's a temporary solution at best, and I agree there's a lot of research that needs to be done, and we're doing it.
Thank you, Jonas. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. And again, if anyone has any follow-up questions, I think Jonas is available via email. You have his email address. So we'd like to move on now to the other panelists. Before I do so, I want to just really quickly summarize what we think sort of came out of the first panel this morning in terms of I think what the panel has been directing the Commission in hopes that what the Commission will focus on. One, I think, is setting the bar higher and adjusting our expectations. The other was looking more closely at what the consequences should be for failure to comply with the rules in terms of enforcement of our existing rules. To think more broadly in terms of wireless, so not just cell phone, but machine to machine, and thinking about accessible systems. And modeling correct behavior so that federal government agencies themselves implement accessibility standards and therefore bring those forward throughout the marketplace as well beyond the government. So those were some themes that came out of this morning's session that we can kind of keep in the back of our mind as we think about trends and technologies. So to start off, we have our first speaker is Matthew Gerst. Matthew is the Counsel of External and State Affairs at CTIA, the Wireless Association. Matthew advises and counsels CTIA and its member companies on a wide range of state and federal policy issues, including mobile broadband, accessibility for persons with disabilities, mobile content and privacy, numbering, and public safety. He represents CTIA on the FCC's North American Numbering Council and has presented before the Hearing Loss Association of America, the Family Online Safety Institute, and CTIA Wireless. So thank you for joining us, Matthew.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name, as Renee said, is Matthew Gerst. I'm Counsel on External and State Affairs at CTIA, the Wireless Association. And I want to thank you for this opportunity for sharing the views of CTIA and our member companies on the increasing opportunities to ensure equal access to broadband through innovative mobile technologies for persons with disabilities. CTIA also thanks the Commission and the accessibility community here today for seeking input from the wireless industry. And I particularly appreciated the comments from the last panel, which clearly recognize the benefits of mobile technology. Today my comments will highlight the significant contributions the wireless industry is making to enhance the way we all communicate, including persons with disabilities. CTI and its members believe that access to wireless products and services are being achieved through readily achievable and technologically feasible solutions, and are committed and are committed to continuing voluntary collaborative initiatives with the Commission and the accessibility community, which will help the industry to identify, prioritize, and address accessibility in wireless products and services. Over the past 25 years, wireless devices and services have become essential to the ways we work, live, and play, and are central communications, information, and safety tools for persons with diverse abilities. CTI commends the FCC for recognizing in the National Broadband Plan the important contribution wireless technologies are providing this community, and agrees that accessible mobile broadband technologies are truly a big deal for all Americans. Today, as a result of the robust competitive wireless ecosystem, U.S. consumers have the kind of choice and value that others in the world strive for. CTI members serve more than 285 million consumers. More than 600 unique wireless devices are available in the United States. More than 1.5 trillion text messages were sent on wireless networks in 2009, and wireless carriers offer a wide variety of services and plans. With the increased availability of mobile broadband services and the significant adoption of smartphones, we've seen an explosion in applications. To date, there are more than 240,000 applications offered at over 7 different stores, and consumers have downloaded these over 4 billion times. This innovative and competitive mobile ecosystem has provided the benefits to persons with disabilities unmatched in other communications industries. As a result of the wireless industry's collective commitment to key accessibility issues, barriers to adoption of wireless, such as cost and accessibility, have lowered, and we've seen the satisfaction with the wireless industry increase. Today, according to the Wireless RRC, which I'm sure Jim will highlight, more than 80% of individuals with disabilities responding to their survey own or have access to wireless communications devices and use those devices for text-based communications such as text messaging, email, instant messaging, and internet access. CTI has continuously demonstrated the innovation and competition throughout the wireless ecosystem, which is providing benefits to all consumers. Wireless carriers are competing to offer services and plans specifically for individuals with disabilities, and mainstream services and devices available to all consumers are serving that same community. Moreover, competition is vigorous among manufacturers, where an increase in market share is being addressed to incorporate a range of accessibility features in their device designs, including text-to-speech, screen readers, hearing compatibility, support for TTY and assistive technology, predictive test, word completion, and voice-activated features. This era of intense competition has largely been developed through a regulatory regime that's allowed the wireless industry flexibility to respond to the market demands and regularly incorporate new accessibility features into existing equipment. However, as noted earlier, Section 255 of the Communications Act limits the ways in which the wireless industry actually addresses accessibility solely to built-in features and compatibility with external AT. When Section 255 was written, the only types of AT available for mobile or wireline phones were items such as TTYs, handset amplifiers, telecoil loops, all of which required the wireless industry to devote significant resources to ensure compatibility. Today, text-based wireless communications such as SMS, email, or IM are more commonly used by persons with disabilities than TTYs, and mainstream accessories for mobile devices such as Bluetooth, keyboards, and headsets provide AT benefits without incorporating specific hardware. Additionally, the FCC described in its white paper that manufacturers are incorporating all of these accessibility features into their application requirements, which are encouraging more and more third-party applications to utilize accessibility features, often yielding more efficient and affordable accessibility solutions than dedicated AT devices. For example, Looktel is here today, and CTI awarded Looktel the First Place Emerging Technology Award at our annual conference. It's a downloadable application to help visually impaired or blind users identify everyday objects and landmarks to utilizing the device's built-in touchscreen and camera functions. There's also iCommunicate, an AAC device which uses both the built-in touchscreen and audio output features to make a customized storyboard and visual schedules for children with developmental delays and autism. In addition to applications dedicated to accessibility, mainstream applications such as Twitterific, Slacker Radio, Mashable, Facebook are all utilizing built-in accessibility features for mainstream mobile devices. As the Commission works to implement the recommendations in the National Broadband Plan, including a potential 255 update, the Commission should utilize a flexible approach which allows the wireless industry to meet Sections 255's accessibility goals through built-in accessibility features, AT compatibility, and recognize the availability of third-party applications. I was encouraged by today's comments, which highlighted this flexible approach, which can allow persons with disabilities to take full advantage of the current wireless market, letting the consumer choose the accessible wireless and accessible solutions to meet their needs. Persons with disabilities are also benefiting from wireless broadband services that are including quality of life opportunities in employment, education, healthcare, and public safety. A recent article in PC World highlighted how Apple's iPad has built-in accessibility features and available third-party applications which can help employers efficiently comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. For example, the Commission recently noted the dedicated AAC device may cost more than $8,000, while a $300 smartphone coupled with a $150 text-to-speech software can work more effectively than the dedicated AAC device. In addition, CTI supports the Commission's recommendation that healthcare policies and programs such as Medicare and insurance regulation can utilize efficiencies in mainstream mobile technologies with built-in accessibility features. From smartphones to wireless PC cards, netbooks, tablets, and Wi-Fi hotspots, CTI believes the Commission's heading in the right direction by establishing a broadband accessibility working group to promote government policies such as universal service and procurement, which will take full advantage of wireless innovations which are providing the persons with disabilities new ways to work, live, and play. Consumers with disabilities also place significant importance on wireless for communications during an emergency. The wireless industry and public safety communities invested substantially in deploying wireless E911 service and designing wireless handsets to be TTY compatible for everyday and emergency communications. Today, long-term and significant work is underway to transition our nation's 911 system to an IP-based 911 system that may have the capability to support voice, text, video, and data communications access. In the case of text-based communications to 911, CTIA is urging the Commission to look at all text-based communication formats and not any single solution, which, like TTY today, may be outdated or underutilized by the consumers and public safeties it's intended to serve tomorrow. CTI believes the Commission, public safety representatives, and the accessibility community are going to find a partner in the wireless industry for the necessary transition to next-generation 911, which may open untold accessibility features for all consumers and those with disabilities. While these examples highlight the potential for mobile devices for persons with disabilities today, the selection of a wireless device continues to be a highly personalized choice for a consumer based on a range of factors, including product awareness and the person's own accessibility awareness, both of which are central to finding the right mobile device. Wireless carriers and manufacturers have taken a number of steps to educate the accessibility community about the plethora of available affordable and wireless products and services that are available. For example, CTI's carrier manufacturing members provide information about their accessible devices directly on their websites. Wireless carriers have engaged in voluntary efforts to educate persons with disabilities and senior citizens about the benefits of wireless. And CTI, along with our carrying members, provides information about accessible wireless products on accesswireless.org and hosts the Wireless IRC's 5-part video series to help consumers choose a hearing aid-compatible wireless device. Today, consumers are better informed about the variety of accessible devices and services available because of these initiatives. And CTI applauds the Commission's recommendation to establish an Accessibility Innovation Forum to share best practices, hold workshops such as this one, aggregate information on accessible products and services. Rather than the regulatory mandates alone, these collaborative processes are going to be proven effective at addressing the fast-moving, innovative, and really ever-changing aspects of the wireless industry. Finally, the wireless industry is thankful for the 258 million wireless, or 85 million wireless consumers, which we know include individuals from the accessibility community, a community that we've learned a lot from. In fact, I've learned a lot from just today. CTI and its members are equally committed to continuing voluntary collaborative initiatives with this community, which will ensure that accessible wireless broadband products and services will be one of the giant leaps of our generation. Thank you. And
thank you, Matthew.
Questions?
Well, I think we'll do questions for everyone afterwards. Okay.
Next up is Judy Harkins, who is professor at Department of Communication Studies at Gallaudet University. Dr. Harkins is the founding director of the Technology Access Program and a principal investigator of the Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center on Telecommunication Access, which is in cooperation with the Trace Center at the University of Wisconsin. Her research bears both directly and indirectly on the accessibility of wireless communications to people with disabilities. She has developed a course for deaf undergraduates at Gallaudet on communication accessibility. Dr. Harkins has also served in an advisory capacity to the FCC and has participated actively in industry forums established with the Alliance for Telecommunication Industry Solutions to produce solutions to accessibility problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on technology trends and recommendations today. I've worked with deaf and hard of hearing people for approximately 40 years. And back in the day, it used to be that parents would come outside their house and yell for their kids to come home. Judy, it's dinner time. And years ago, I got questions a lot about what a parent of a deaf child should do. How can I call my child home? And great concerns about that kind of thing. And today, I don't get those questions, of course, because wireless technologies and including the pricing strategies of the industry, including family plans and flat rate pricing, have eradicated this problem for many families, regardless of whether the children of the family have or do not have disabilities. And this is one small example of how mobile devices can help people with disabilities, their friends, families, and communities. Today, the utility of wireless technologies is skyrocketing as convergence takes some of its more advanced forms. There are many promising trends in wireless telecommunications that on their own can support the accessibility, usability, and utility of devices for people with various types of disabilities. And Matt has alluded to some of these already, and I'm sure others will down the panel. As the functionality of wireless technology increases through convergence, it's virtually impossible to mention every possible benefit given the wide array of disabilities. First, open platforms offering third-party developers the opportunity to develop niche and broad market applications that benefit people with disabilities by providing new uses and accessibility tools. And Matt alluded to the very large number of downloads of these third-party products. Increases in bandwidth and spectrum are desired both by industry and people with disabilities to provide more functionality on the go to more users, without the industry finding it necessary to sacrifice quality in such important communication functions as voice quality and two-way video quality for sign communication. Even where the highest bandwidth is not available, the merging of Wi-Fi with cellular functions into single compact device provides users with more opportunity to access broadband from hotspots without having to carry bulky equipment. Increasing processing speeds in smartphones can likewise be used to crunch the video data in the handset and mitigate the need for high bandwidth for such applications as two-way signed conversations. The Mobile ASL project at the University of Washington has developed software for optimizing American Sign Language in mobiles that use their software to control or minimize the amount of bandwidth needed for two-way conversations. So the question is, will this approach be adopted in mainstream devices to keep this mitigation of bandwidth going? Making the Internet mobile and accessible brings the communication information resources on the net to people with disabilities wherever they are. And this is particularly important because other sources, for example, a deaf person stopping by a gas station to ask directions, may not be possible if there are communication barriers present. Third-party access services such as relay services have been and will continue to be improved for mobile use. Other remote services could also be used for remote translation or transcription for face-to-face situations, interactions with police officers, for example. Front-facing cameras, that is where the camera and the screen are co-located for video communication, are becoming available on a few models, and hopefully this is a trend and not a temporary situation, as it is necessary for two-way video conversation. Global positioning technologies and tracking technologies provide convenience in wayfinding and new resources for personal and public safety. The Commercial Mobile Alert Service, planned for rollout in 2012, will provide location-based short text alerts to serious emergency, especially helpful for people with disabilities who may not have access to the audio and information provided by, for example, car radios, sirens, public address systems, or word-of-mouth information from bystanders. Flat rate plans, including text-only plans, have enabled many people to access wireless technology even on limited budgets. For example, most of our students at Gallaudet. Captioning capability, although it usually lags behind the introduction of a video service, has been increasingly provided in popular internet video venues. And I could go on and on. It's just a wonderful era for new opportunities. I'm going to address areas meriting some attention, because we know from past experience that just because a technology holds potential for accessibility, it does not mean that it will be implemented. The market will make the determination, and it's the FCC's role to monitor and enforce the industry's obligation to make products and services accessible where readily achievable, but where the market fails to provide. As indicated above, more is readily achievable now than in the past. First, we are still lacking a viable way for people who rely on text and video services to contact 911 in emergency. Although plans are in place for the next generation of 911 services to be robust with regard to accessibility, the realization of the next generation in a country as large and diverse as this one is far away. The FCC needs to lead in putting in place a near-term, and here I mean within a year or so, solution for people to be able to contact emergency responders when they are mobile through text and later through video. As new air interfaces are introduced and new forms of voice communication enter, the prevalence of hearing aid-compatible devices needs to continue to improve. This is an area where clearly market forces will not necessarily dictate design. Captioning of television to broadcast mobile devices is a critical feature with mainstream application, but without an obvious market pull, it often lags behind and requires more consumer advocacy than should be necessary. Given that reasons for the 13-inch screen requirement in the 1990 Television Decoder Circuitry Act are obsolete, caption capability in mobile should be a logical requirement. I know that may be not technically true. It's my opinion. The introduction of the CMAS makes it ever more important that speech output on a wide array of mobile phones be made available. If the CMAS, which is text-based, is successful in its mission, it will be essential that a wide array of mobile devices be able to speak the message so that it is accessible to people who are blind and who have low vision, even if they have plain vanilla mobile phones. This function will benefit not only blind users but those with low vision, and also be possibly of value to highway safety because drivers, rather than grabbing for a phone, would hear the message if they wish. The opportunity here is that memory is ever cheaper and the array of phones that could support speech output is ever expanding. The general public began to discover text communication after the deaf community had been using it for a generation. Will the same happen for video communication? And the answer to this question is still uncertain, so we still do not know if this will be a killer app as text over internet has been. The front-facing camera is critical to this form of communication, and time will be needed to allow the application to take hold. Interoperability of video mobile devices with land-based video phones used by deaf and hard of hearing will possibly be a challenge, as the newer SIP technology in mobiles will not work with a large portion of the embedded base of landline video phones. Voice quality on mobile phones has traditionally not been one of the selling points of this service. The availability of bandwidth and faster processing opens the door for more high-fidelity audio benefiting millions of people who acquire hearing loss in their older years, a number that is going to be rapidly growing as the baby boomers age. And so the question is, will mobile phones begin to provide better listening experience? Along with video interoperability, text interoperability needs to be provided at a level comparable to that provided for voice. Without an international standard for conversational text, functional equivalency in telecommunications cannot be attained. International harmonization has never been more important, and we were just talking about that offline with Dave Zumba and Jim in a conversation with our global economy. Companies want it and consumers want it. The FCC needs to have a proactive role so that public interest is served and the standards of accessibility only improve over time. Collaboration among FCC bureaus will be necessary, particularly possibly involving the International Bureau. I've appended to my remarks, which will be on the website, a list of areas needing harmonization. This list was provided by Gunnar Hellström of Omnitor in Sweden, who is perhaps the leading international expert in telecommunications standards and harmonization efforts related to accessibility, and who is a partner in our telecommunications on RERC access. Thank you again for the opportunity to present these thoughts.
Thank you, Judy. Next up is Jim Mueller, who is the Project Director for Rehabilitation on Engineering Research Center on Wireless Technologies. He is an industrial designer who has worked in the field of design for people with disabilities since 1974. He has experience as an assistive technology provider, researcher, and design consultant. Jim is one of the authors of the 7 Principles of Universal Design, and he also co-chairs the Industrial Designer Society of America's Special Interest Section on Universal Design. He supervises a nationwide survey, focus groups, and user testing on wireless product use by persons with intellectual, physical, and sensory disabilities. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Trying not to hide behind this microphone here, it's so big. And I've got this big clock in front of me, staring me right in the face, so it's going to keep me honest. I'm just wondering, if I go out of bounds, does it stop the clock? Or I can see that it doesn't, so thank you for clarifying that. I'm here to talk with you a little bit today about the user research that we do at the Wireless Rehabilitation Engineering Center. It's a very exciting position that I have because even though, as Renee tactfully pointed out, I've been in this field a while, it's always a surprise to learn how users use and why they might not use a particular technology, in this case wireless. And so we try not to make assumptions about what we think we know after our years in the field. We're always open to learn new things, and I'm going to share some of those today. I appreciate, Pam, your sharing some of the questions that you expected us to get, because it tends to validate what I was going to say anyway. Might mean we're on the right track, who knows. But I want to share with you just some of the user research we've been doing and address some of the questions that Pam shared. Since 2001, we have done things like a survey of user needs for wireless technologies among people with disabilities in the United States, and we've started a consumer advisory network inviting people who take that survey to be part of our nationwide network. We have about 900 people in that network now. And those people participate in focus groups, user testing, nationwide studies that we can do online, and I'm going to share with you some of the findings of each of those projects. One of the questions that Pam circulated was, what are some of the current technologies that are meeting the needs and the challenges of people with disabilities? And I'd like to just say a little bit about a touchscreen project which we did last summer, where we invited people in our consumer advisory network who primarily used very, very simple devices to try things like the iPhone, the BlackBerry Storm, HTC Touch, just to see what the use of a touchscreen device might be like for these folks, primarily to just explore the touchscreen. But as I mentioned, we always get surprised. And these are people who were initially very, very intimidated by these devices, either because of visual limitations, manual limitations, cognitive limitations, a combination of those things. And what we found was that the friendlier the device appeared to them, the more likely they were to take the device further throughout all its capabilities, even though they were intimidated. For example, using an iPhone, as soon as they powered it up, screen lights up and invites them to slide to unlock. Now, these were people who had no idea what this phone was going to do, but all of a sudden it presented a very easy task to them. They put their finger on it and they slid it, and it worked. That told them that this is not going to hurt you. This device is not going to break. It's going to help you. These people were invited to explore further. The BlackBerry Storm offered to them a tutorial that introduced itself to the users. Here's what I can do, and here's what you can do. It also gave them both visual and tactile feedback to their inputs so that they knew what they were going to do, what would happen before it actually happened. These were things that enabled people to be more confident in exploring technology. Now, we've all had that experience. Every time you buy a new device, most of us, I won't ask for a show of hands of how many of us study manuals before we use a device, but I would suspect it wouldn't be many hands. So all of us face that fear factor when we're first starting to use a device, people with disabilities especially. Another activity that we've done through our user research is we've done some focus groups, and one of the things that we did was invite clinicians who work with people with acquired brain injuries to talk to us about the patients and the clients that they work with and their wireless experiences. We were a little bit surprised to know how deep the penetration is of wireless use among some of these people who are, many of them, low-functioning individuals who work with caretakers and caregivers and also assistive individuals who take them around to tasks that they have to do. So they're not what you'd call primarily independent folks, but they do use wireless products. What the clinicians told us is that even with complex operations, repetition, And the need to rely on these devices equals memory and familiarity. So that in the case of these individuals using devices that were not intuitive, that were not easy to learn, they were so motivated and spent so much time working with them that they became proficient with them and familiar with them. These clinicians also told us about the importance of location-based prompting, the ability to leave notes for themselves in their own voices. Keep in mind, these are probably people who have heard people telling them what to do for so long, it becomes like white noise. And what they said was the really powerful prompts, the really powerful reminders are the ones that the individuals are able to record in their own voice and play back to themselves. And as Judy alluded, some devices are becoming available with front-facing cameras, so these can be video notes to themselves. Very powerful reminders to individuals who have cognitive limitations. We also held some focus groups among people with low vision and asked them about how they use wireless devices. And they were very vocal about saying that for them, wireless accessibility has enabled them to trump architectural inaccessibility. So where they find themselves challenged by ongoing physical barriers, wireless accessibility has given them an alternative to that, and they feel that power. They feel the power of applications that they're able to add to their phones now. Things like sound amplification, text-to-speech and speech-to-text, screen magnification. These give them not necessarily a way to avoid assistive technology, because assistive technology has its place as well. As Matt pointed out, some of the difference in price, though, can be dramatic. For example, Nokia offers an application, a free application called Nokia Magnifier that can be downloaded onto their phones, enables an individual to use the camera to enlarge things so that they can see them. Now, there are pieces of assistive technology that are stationary, also mobile, that do some of the same things, but this simple application enables a person to use their mobile phone to do the same things. So we're talking about wireless technologies meeting the needs by offering individuals with and without disabilities more choices in the things that they need to do every day. Every one of the people in those focus groups tended to say the same thing. If they didn't say it, they agreed with it. And that was one of the individuals said, you know, there are a lot of things that I forget when I leave my house, but if I forget my mobile phone, I come back and get it because I know I'm not going anywhere without it. And so they choose not to go anywhere without it. Some of the challenges that these individuals face, though, are things like maintaining battery power, continuous power. One of our advisors at our RERC has called our particular attention to the issue of what happens when you're out of power in an emergency. And if any of us have been in an emergency before, you know that eventually you can't charge your device anymore. And if you were really relying on it, especially for emergency communications, that's a really big deal. The more we rely on wireless, the more critical it is that we have access to power. Another challenge that we're facing right now is this issue of designing for people with cognitive disabilities. This is an issue that came up at the Section 508-255 refresh meeting yesterday. How do we do these things? How do we meet the needs not only of people with physical disabilities, but also sensory and cognitive disabilities? As we know, this is also an issue that is going to continue to grow as the population of people with disabilities grows. Some of the things that people have told us is that because devices become smaller, the complexity grows, the density of capabilities within that device increases, they find themselves shying away from those things. And one individual told us that she gave up and went back to a Firefly. Now, if you don't know what that is, she made a point of telling us, you know, that's designed for children, don't you? And she realized that whenever she pulls that Firefly out, she's identifying herself, and she feels less so as a result of having to use that. And she resents it, and rightfully. One of the other questions that Pam forwarded in my final 49 seconds is the question of access to all this information. Matt talked about how users find out about what's available to them. More than one consumer has called and asked us if there's a phone that does such and such, and we've said, you know, your phone itself is capable of doing that right now. and we're surprised at the amount of capability that's in the phones that people are not even aware of. Those could be accessibility features or something else. So about 6 years ago, we came up with a guide to enable people to do that. It was very popular and still is. This year, we did a study of about 81 people in our consumer advisory network who we led out into the internet to find resources that are available to them now to make those choices. We just got those results back, and we found that although some of the sites are a little more complicated than others, when we were able to lead individuals directly to the portal that would take them to accessibility information, they found those resources very, very useful to them. And we are going to publish those things within the next week or so. Matt, you'll be happy to know that the CTIA site was one of the top sites that they noted. You can take that information back. But the good news is that that information is getting out there, and people are finding it useful. The word is that we need to do more of those things, and we need to share that information with the community. The community's out there and is really thirsty for it. I find it really exciting to work with these individuals. It's always surprising. It's always energizing, and I look forward to doing more. I hope I'll have a chance to share more information of our user research with you later on this afternoon. Thank you very much, and thank you for that extra 58 seconds.
Thank you, Jim. Next is Rebecca Schwartz, who is the Director for Regulatory and Governmental Affairs at the Telecommunications Industry Association. TIA is a leading trade association for the information and communications technology industry. Since joining in 2006, Rebecca has advocated member companies' positions on communications policy issues, including broadband and broadband-enabled services, market competition, accessibility regulations, spectrum and public safety issues, and jurisdiction of communication services. She is also responsible for developing policy to inform and also to educate government representatives on behalf of TIA members and their technologies. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you for having me here today. As Renee said, TIA represents telecom equipment manufacturers, but it's really more than just telecom. We represent manufacturers of all ICT equipment, so that includes mobile handsets and developers of the operating systems and some software applications that you can find on the mobile handsets, since we're here to talk about mobile devices today, but we also represent a variety of manufacturers of all broadband-enabled devices. We also represent the manufacturers of the mobile networks, which is very important because a lot of times something might be available on a device, but you also have to make sure that it's compatible with the network, if the network has sufficient bandwidth, and as we know, there are different air interfaces, so a feature that might be available on one interface may not necessarily be available on another interface, so it's very important to have that communication between the network manufacturers and the handset manufacturers. You can see some of our companies here today. Motorola and BlackBerry have both displayed some of their devices, and I'll talk a little bit about the features later. Our companies design, produce, and deploy a wide variety of devices with the goal of making technology accessible to all Americans, and this is an objective we share with the Commission, and we've worked voluntarily and productively with the disability community to work on this goal, and open communication is very important to us, and we commend the FCC for taking this step today, and as they've done also with the production of the National Broadband Plan, but some of the things that industry does to communicate not only with the FCC and with other federal agencies, we also have ongoing discussions on Capitol Hill, and most of you are familiar with some pending legislation in this field, but we also talk a lot with the disability community, and we do this by participating not only in what you think of the typical industry events, such as CTIA or CEA, but we participate in events such as CSUN or the Hearing Loss Association of America, and actually encourage the FCC to maybe attend some of these events. Also, ATIA, the Assistive Technology Industry Association, and this gives us a chance not only to get feedback from the consumers and the people who are using these devices, but to build relationships with AT developers and software developers, and really understand what can we do as device manufacturers to make our devices compatible with with some of these applications that we might not know are out there, and also work with the application developers to tell them what can you do to make your application run on our device. I was just out at CSUN, and BlackBerry did a presentation on their APIs and what the software developers and application developers should consider when they're developing applications, and specifically for accessibility. So what could you consider? And one thing to consider might be a variety of alerting, so a visual and non-visual, and alerting sounds and a buzzing, because this makes the device more accessible to all types of disabilities. So accessibility is obviously a priority to TIA because it's a priority to our member companies. Our companies consider accessibility from the beginning stages of product design, and we also consider accessibility when developing our APIs. And I think this is really exemplifies a change in the wireless industry. When cell phones first became prevalent, there were complaints that they weren't hearing aid compatible and they're not accessible. But I think this has really changed in the broadband world. All major manufacturers and developer of operating systems consider accessibility when designing their products. And this is due to a lot due just to awareness and understanding the problems. And today has been very helpful just to hear. Jim's presentation was very helpful to hear what the consumers look for and what is important to them, but also where we might need to improve. But a lot of the advancements are due to technology, because technology has advanced, and we have a lot more spectral efficiency, which allows our companies to put more data-intensive applications, which are helpful to people with disabilities, on their phone. Our companies, like I said, offer a wide variety of accessible features and products, some of which are on display today. And a lot of these features we may not consider even accessibility features because we all use them. So this might include one-touch dialing or voice dialing, which I know I find very handy when I'm in the car and I can just say, call mom. But this is also great for someone who's not in the car and is at home, but they have a mobility they might have a mobility impairment and use their voice to dial. Some other features include non-audio notifications, visual display, voice recognition, which I already covered, text-to-speech, reverse contrast, text magnification, and I could go on. And some of the newer technologies include screen reading capabilities like the KFN-B reader that's available on Nokia's phone. Text-to-speech is becoming more prevalent, and even closed captioning on small devices, which RIM is displaying, I believe, 2 or 3 devices today where there's closed captioning available on the BlackBerry and smartphones. And although a lot of these features are available out of the box, these features become even more prevalent when you take into account software and applications, which Matt already covered a little bit, but I think it's a very important point because it really has changed the mobile landscape and how we use our phones and what we consider our phone, because not everyone considers it a phone. I use my phone, I guess, primarily for email and instant messaging and as a camera, but the person next to me might have the exact same phone and use it actually for voice communication 75% of the time, or might use it for gaming. And these possibilities just become endless when we start considering software, and a lot of times these software applications are available at little or no cost to the consumer. And I think this is an important point when you bring it into the accessibility realm, because there are such a great degree of disabilities. As we've covered, there's visual and mobile and cognitive and learning disabilities, and not every person with a disability wants the same thing from their phone. So some of the features that I discussed, text magnification may be very important to someone who has low vision, but to someone with a hearing disability, they're more likely to value a instant messaging application, which are very prevalent on cell phones today. I'd also like to take a minute to talk about TIA as a standards developing organization, because we greatly encourage voluntary industry standards. And a recent standard that we have developed and actually updated is TIA 1083. And this was a standard that was developed voluntarily by industry after receiving complaints about interference on digital cordless phones, and our engineers realized that this interference was caused by magnetic interference and not radio frequency interference, which is the focus of C6319, the government-mandated hearing aid compatibility standard. But I like to bring this up because this standard was not only because it was developed voluntarily and due to collaboration between our companies and also collaboration with the Hearing Loss Association of America, and really because we started to understand that consumers were complaining and how can we fix this, but also because in 5 years our companies have put this on 100% of their digital cordless phones, but has also recently updated the standard so it applies to newer technologies with digital interfaces, so technologies such as Wi-Fi, voice over IP, USB, and Bluetooth. And I think this is very important because it happens so quickly, and also because these are the technologies that we're talking about today and that can be found on our smartphones today. And I'd like to just take 1 second to talk about global harmonization, which has been brought up a few times because it's very important to look at what other countries are doing, and Elizabeth did a good job of naming some of the ongoing initiatives in her broadband paper, Reach 112, and Europe's Web Accessibility Initiative, and I believe Canada just released a paper on IP-based emergency services, but also to recognize that the United States is still the leader in this area. So not only should we be looking at what other countries are doing, but realize that people are looking at us. And this is important to TIA especially because our companies are global companies. So what we do in the United States, we also want to be able to sell to countries across the world. So I'll just wrap up by saying, as we all know, the communications landscape is constantly evolving, in a large part due to technology. This has allowed us to communicate at home and on the go using speech, text, and even video. While these developments undoubtedly improve the lives of all Americans, they also present challenges. This is why TIA consistently engages with lawmakers and the disability community on the best way to overcome these challenges, not only through technology, but open communication among all stakeholders. TIA commends the Commission for opening an honest discussion on accessible communications, and we look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Next, we have Jeff Fried, who is Multimedia and Web Access Project Director for the National Center for Accessible Media. Jeff is currently the Director of NCAM's Captioning Solutions for Handheld Media and Mobile Devices project, a U.S. Department of Education-funded initiative to optimize production tools, formats, delivery methods, and display technologies to ensure that captioned media can be delivered to and shown on handheld devices of all types. Jeff is an ongoing contributor to international standards and specifications that enable people with disabilities to benefit from digital media and convergent technologies. He is also a part of the development team for Magpie, NCAM's free caption authoring software, and has written and published internationally distributed guidelines explaining techniques for creating accessible multimedia and websites. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, and I would like to thank the Commission for inviting me to come up and speak today and also to show some demonstrations on the other side of the room. Just briefly, I want to start by introducing what NCAM is to those of you who don't know us. We're the National Center for Accessible Media, which is a part of the WGBH Educational Foundation, the same WGBH that you know about if you watch public television or listen to public radio. No, I'm not going to ask you for money. NCAM is a part of the Media Access Group, which is made up of three groups. The Caption Center, which was launched by WGBH in 1972. We're the oldest captioning agency in the world. In fact, we invented captioning at WGBH in the early 70s. In 1990, we launched Descriptive Video Service, DVS. Again, another first in media accessibility, creating audio descriptions or video descriptions for people who cannot see the screen on television programs and movies. And then in 1993, we launched the National Center for Accessible Media, or NCAM, as we call ourselves, where we specialized in making electronic media of all kinds accessible to people with sensory impairments. Some of the things that we've developed at NCAM include the rear window captioning system. Some of you may have seen this or used this in any number of hundreds of theaters across the U.S. and Canada, where deaf and hard of hearing people can go to first-run movies in movie theaters and see the movie with closed captions. We also invented DVS Theatrical, a similar access technology for people who are blind or visually impaired to go to first-run movies and hear descriptions in the theater with their sighted counterparts. And as Renee said, we've developed software at NCAM for online captioning of many media types, including Flash, QuickTime, Windows Media, and others. But we also have operated under a number of federally funded projects at NCAM doing R&D into different types of access technology. And that's actually what I'd like to talk to you about today. A project that I manage at NCAM is called Access to Handheld Media and Mobile Devices. It was launched in 2007 and is funded by NIDR at the U.S. Department of Education. And basically what this project is doing is researching, well, our broad goal really is to ensure that captions can be delivered to handheld or mobile devices of all kinds. We're talking about smartphones, we're talking about mobile digital TV receivers, we're talking about laptops, anything that moves that can display video or television signals nowadays. We want to make sure that that thing can also receive and display captions. We've done a lot of work with policymakers at the W3C and the ATSC and SMPTE, Society for Motion Picture and Television Engineers, to make sure that the standards that those bodies create have accommodations for captions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. We have also conducted a number of focus groups for consumers to come in to our offices in Boston and Los Angeles and elsewhere, take a look at some demonstration movies that we have created that have captions and tell us, are the captions readable? Is this font better than that font? Is this size better? Is that size better? What color should we be using? What are the characteristics that make up an ideal caption display? Because it's one thing to actually have captions on your smartphone, but it's another thing to be able to read them or to be able to see them. It's nice that they're there, but if you can't read them, then they're essentially useless. When this project is over, we will be publishing our research on the NCAM website, which I'll give you the URL at the end, which will describe these font characteristics as well as a lot of our other research. We're publishing this information to help the industry use this in order to develop a caption display, hardware and software, that will be usable to as many consumers as possible. Some of the partners in this project are here today. Apple is here, LG Electronics, Research in Motion, Samsung. We also work with WGBH, America Online, and McNeil Lehrer Productions. They have all contributed time and energy into this project to help ensure that captions are available on mobile devices. I want to talk to you about standards, and before you all drop your heads, it won't take long. Standards are actually very interesting, and standards are necessary, and I want to dwell on that point for just a second, that if it weren't for standards, we wouldn't have common technologies like television and radio. And the same thing can be applied to the mobile sphere. NCAM spent a lot of time working with the ATSC to help ensure that the new mobile handheld television standard, which is colloquially known as A153, can accommodate closed captions. Just like at home now, you all have digital televisions. Those digital TVs can receive and display or decode closed captions. We wanted to make sure that the signal that is broadcast to the mobile devices, which is not the same as the one that's broadcast to your home devices, does the same thing. We wanted to make sure that that signal can contain closed captions if the captions are available. And that is now the case. So the devices that LG is showing on the other side of the room, the devices that NCAM is showing on the other side of the room, some of those can receive a mobile DTV signal, and if captions are there, the captions will appear on the screen. It's important to say if the captions are there, because there is no current mandate that says those little devices have to be able to decode the captions, unlike the mandate that says the big devices do, the one in your home, nor is there a mandate that says the mobile digital signal must contain captions. And we're hoping that the FCC will take a look at that and make sure that mobile devices will always have access to captions. It's a good thing to point out as well that some people in the industry are already paying attention to the fact that the ATSC specification allows for captions by providing caption decoding capability in their devices now. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about some things that could be done to foster development in terms of accessibility and captions on mobile devices. I mentioned the word standard several times already. The standardization of a caption format for broadband use, I think, would be a very good idea. In the broadcast world, there is one way to transmit captions. There's one format. In the broadband world, I meant to say the broadcast world if I didn't. In the broadband world, there are about, I'm not kidding, 50 ways to transmit captions to your computer, to your QuickTime player, Windows Media Player, any number of players, your DVD player. There are a lot, and that is part of the problem. Choice is good, but in this case, choice is not so good because when a captioning agency creates captions for somebody on the web, they have to know a number of things, not the least of which is the format of the player and what features that format supports. It's very difficult and very confusing, and the result is that you often wind up with poor quality captions. Having one caption standard or one caption format would alleviate that problem. It would be nice if there were a way to create a standard method of transferring captions from the broadcast world to the broadband world, or from the fixed broadcast world to the mobile broadcast world. Incorporations of standards and regulations into rulings from the FCC would also go a long way. I think we all know that as children, we didn't do what we were supposed to do unless there was a punishment involved, and I hesitate to use that word here, but the use of force will often achieve remarkable things. I'll leave it at that. It would be nice if there were more force behind captions for small screens, mobile devices and other small screens. It is also a good idea to continue to incorporate user and producer input when developing regulations and standards, not just industry input, making sure that the people who are actually going to use these devices and these accessibility features can actually use them in a way that makes sense and provides the correct information. This morning, some people mentioned that it would be a good idea to make sure that manufacturers and standards organizations always keep in mind accessibility from the beginning. And a good way to do that is an idea that's similar to an environmental impact statement. Call it a disability impact statement that would force standards organizations or manufacturers to always consider the effect on people with disabilities right from the get-go. From when they start designing these devices and these standards, have to follow a procedure in order to consider people with disabilities. The shot clock says I have 30 seconds. And so I will close simply by saying for more information about the mobile media project at NCAM, you can go to ncam.wgbh.org/mm for mobile media. There are also some samples of captioned media on small devices to the side of the room. 10 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Our final presenter is Brian Fontes, who is now the CEO of National Emergency Number Association. Brian is responsible for all aspects of the association, but his primary objectives are to ensure that all Americans have access to reliable 911 service, 911 centers have state-of-the-art technologies and well-trained professionals, and sufficient funding is available so that the 911 system can best serve those who call upon it as their first voice of hope. Prior to joining the association, he was Vice President of Federal Relations for Singular Wireless and also Senior Vice President for Policy and Administration at CTIA. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thank you so much, Renee, and thank you, the FCC folks, for convening this panel. I am particularly impressed with the presentations that have been made by my colleagues on the panel, and I remember meetings with Judy and Matt and others on this panel and their dedication and commitment. This panel, this day represents three passions in my life, and so I'm very excited about being here. The first passion, of course, is 911 public safety. The second passion is wireless communications. And the third passion is access to telecommunications by all individuals, including those with disabilities. And these three passions have been the good fortune of my professional life to be able to work in three areas that I care a great deal about. I'm at that stage in life where I can really say, where has the time gone? And legitimately get away with saying that. Soon we'll be celebrating the 20 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was here at the Commission 27 years ago when we issued the first wireless licenses. And 9 years ago, the Commission ruled in establishing E911, the ability to locate someone within certain parameters when dialing a 911 call. So we really have seen a lot of change. And sometimes perspective allows us to realize where we've been, where we're going, and what continues to be the need to accomplish things in the future. So today we've heard that all of the vast growth in the wireless industry, currently 285 million wireless subscribers. What's amazing is in probably 2 or 3 years we'll be a nation that will exceed 100% penetration in wireless devices. Just yesterday, the Center for Disease Control reported that 25% of the U.S. population is basically a wireless population. They've cut the cord, if you want to look at it that way. We also recognize that in the 911 field, given the fact that the rules were implemented 9 years ago, approximately 97% of the population has access to some form of E911 Phase 2, the ability to locate somebody within a certain number of meters and the callback capability in the event that the call is dropped. Pretty remarkable accomplishments in many respects, very short periods of time. Now, when we take a look at wireless, and particularly wireless relationship to E911, we've seen the amazing growth and in government policies creating what we are enjoying today. We've seen the creation of a competitive wireless environment. I don't think there is anybody out there that would disagree that wireless is in fact competitive. We've seen the development of wireless moving from analog to digital to third generation, now fourth generation technologies. We've seen service plans offered by carriers adapt to the needs of their customer base, including those needs of individuals with disabilities. We've seen the growth of broadband in the wireless context, and particularly the growth of applications. Keep in mind that applications were basically non-existent or very limited in the accessibility to applications probably 3 years ago. And within 3 years, this has grown to somewhere between a $2.5 to $3 billion industry. Remarkable growth in such an extraordinarily short period of time. So how did we get there? If you look around and you see all of these devices here, it's quite impressive. We have auto translation and captioning, built-in screen readers, front-facing cameras Judy talked about, and what these can do to individuals who need access to telecommunication services. Voice to text, voicemail box, mobile devices, as I said, with cameras that can scan food. We have the LookTel demo over here. Voice commands, we have ATT's Mobile Speak, Android's TalkBack, we have Apple's VoiceOver, we have text-to-speech software, and the list goes on and on. And these are currently being developed. We're at the very beginning of this total change, sea change, in how consumers use their wireless devices. So I think this is a remarkable accomplishment in a very short period of time. You know, it was quite a few years ago that my niece, in a wonderful marriage to a great guy, in the first year of that marriage, he went blind. And I give both of these young people, I get kind of teary-eyed about it, I give both of these young people incredible credit. They're not so young anymore. But I remember when they both received their first cell phone and how much security and comfort it gave my niece to be able to communicate with her husband in order to pick him up where he was supposed to be and where he was, etc. It just allowed a great deal of ease. Now today, all these years forward, look at all of these other developments that help facilitate just the ease that all of us, including those with disabilities, have in living their lives and being employed and being able to participate in educational programs and so forth. So it's an amazing, amazing time. Now, I mentioned earlier, how did we get there? Because I think the lessons from how we got there will help us in the future. Because there's still, and I appreciated Judy's list, there's still a lot of work to be done, and that's a good thing. But government policy in the world of wireless was really pretty light-handed and left a lot to be done by those who are out there competing with one another. Recently, the broadband report was released, and they recognized the need for wireless services. They recognized the spectrum needs that wireless will have to have in order to continue to provide the number of applications which consume spectrum. That same report talked a great deal about public safety and next generation 911. Just as we talk about these applications and all that they can do for each of us in today's world, that dead ends when you reach 911. Because 911 centers today are incapable of dealing with voice, video, and data simultaneously. Now, there's some centers that are moving to provide some video communication. Chicago is one example. There are other centers who try to deal with texting, and there are industries out there now that are trying to do that bridge gap with existing texting services while we plan for the advanced texting services to provide protocols that will enable prioritization of 911 calls. So we have to maintain this, in my opinion, light hand of government regulation. We have to encourage what this panel and today's sessions are all about, and that is bringing together people who can communicate about what is desired and what is capable of being done, and to work collaboratively on a going forward basis. Are there needs for standards? Yes. Are there standards bodies that can achieve that? Of course there are. They've existed for many years. And so as we move forward, I think that we have to look at how we came to be where we are today and the successes that we've achieved, recognizing that this is no time to rest, that all the solutions are not there. I would welcome the opportunity for all of these app stores that are out there now to have somebody review these applications for the possible applicability for individuals with disabilities, so that at the front end of getting these applications into the marketplace, they may be able to help organizations disseminate information about these applications and the benefits to them. So as we look to the future, we have a lot of promise. We must continue on the track of dialogue, constructive work, to ensure that we achieve all that can be achieved, given the fact that we are in a time when change occurs so rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks to all of our panelists. I actually have a specific question for you, Brian, since we're on the subject of 911. One of the issues that was raised on the earlier panel today was wanting from the disabled community more direct communication or actual direct communication with the 911 centers. Mm-hmm. And they've mentioned, of course, communication issues and time lag issues. Can you talk a little bit about how those issues might be addressed?
Sure, and for those who know my past, you kind of know how I operate. One of the things I wanted to do is to make sure that within the National Emergency Number Association, we actually have an accessibility committee that work to try to address these types of issues of ensuring that there is the capability of communicating. And I think a lot of the work from this accessibility committee has, in fact, I know it has inspired some of the companies that provision services to the 911 community to develop types of technologies that will help in the case of the old texting platforms to be able to communicate with 911 centers. I think particularly as we move to the next generation environment in our nation's call centers, the accessibility task force will be instrumental and have been instrumental in ensuring that texting, voice, video, etc. are capable of being delivered and understood in that call center environment. So we're doing work internally within the organization to ensure that accessibility issues are brought into the front-end planning stages of the standards work that we do, both in the operations side of the call center and also the technical requirements that are necessary as we move to fourth generation or next generation.
Okay.
My question is related to information sharing. A number of you, and even in this morning's panel, talked about the importance of sharing best practices, sharing solutions, providing information to consumers that's understandable and useful. And Brian, you just actually mentioned something of like a clearinghouse where people could work together. Can anyone in the panel talk a little bit more about what you would expect and what you would want? I especially want Judy to answer this one, but anyone too.
I don't know exactly how to answer it, but I would say that a good portal is a good way. People do seem to know how to find information on the internet if they have a good way in. The front page of a company is not a good way in generally, and there are developing resources to get people to the right pages with the right information. I like Brian's idea of having apps tagged in terms of potential use so that they can be searchable that way by people with disabilities. I don't know if a clearinghouse is the way to go, really. People do like to go to companies and get current information about features, and things change so quickly that I don't know if that would really work. I may be wrong, but I wouldn't want to handle that project myself.
I just want to add one other thing. In addition to my real job, I'm also an advisory member to Mobile Future, and we just released today, Allison Remsen is over here if you want to wave your hand, I think a pretty healthy report on what's happening in the world of wireless and things that are there that are happening, and also point to the future. So, I think that where we can go in directing the answer to your question is I think dialogue is critically important. And if the dialogue isn't there, people are not going to understand explicitly what the needs and means are. When I was at Singular, and Susan Mazrui is in the audience here, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but we would have meetings periodically with organizations representing individuals with disabilities, with our CEO, COO, and other leadership within the organization to engage in that type of dialogue. So I think it is a critical thing to be able to communicate, and the forums such as this or other fora that may exist to provide that dialogue helps. Now, is it the end-all means of everything? Of course not. But it's at least an ability to understand what the concerns and issues are.
I just wanted to, I thought, sorry, that, one of the things that's helpful, I think, for the accessibility community to find the applications is information that's being shared among the community themselves. I think one of the best resources is the community actually being engaged and saying and reviewing products and reviewing services and putting those things out there. Paul Schroeder mentioned today that their Service Access World has some reviews of some products. I've seen some great blogs from the community themselves that have reviewed applications and saying this works for this disability, this works for this purpose. Sometimes in this space, I think if a clearinghouse is developed, I think it'd be helpful to have that sort of input from the community more than anything to sort of spearhead what is it that you're looking for.
I also add on the subject of dialogue, I think it's very important for industry to understand what the community wants and what the community feels is lacking, but I think it has to be a two-way dialogue. Also, the FCC and the community needs to understand what's technically available. So we might want hearing aid compatibility on all phones, but there may be a certain air interface where it's not as easily feasible to put on hearing aid compatibility. I won't call out any air interfaces specifically, but that's something we've gone up and talked with actually just this week with the Wireless Bureau about, like this. These are some of the technological constraints, and this is why. So it's important when the FCC is looking at how to regulate accessibility to understand what's there and what are some of the technical limitations and tailor any regulations to those limitations.
Sorry, and if I could also add to that point, and I think it's a great point that Becky's making, but I think one of the things that if a forum is developed or a clearinghouse is helping to manage the expectations of the community for what's currently available, what's going to be available, what are the goals that we're looking for. A classic example, a apropos example right now is Next Generation 911 services. This is a yet as defined area of what's going to be required there. The Commission's doing a lot of work through the CISRIC. There are some other entities that are looking into these issues, but there's a clear need from the accessibility community for these services. It's just not clear that the public safety community or industry is there yet.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and that's why the accessibility committee within NENA is critically important, because we are in the process of formulating some of the, what I call the baseline standards for Next Generation 911, upon which development will be built. But you have to have that input at that stage, and I think it's critically important that our accessibility committee is engaged, because without it, the ship may sail a little bit, and it's kind of hard to bring it back into dock. I'd rather deal with all of the developments that are there now in the standards development process so that we can ensure accessibility, again, by all Americans, by all people.
Thank you to all of you. Your comments and presentations have really been invaluable for us today. I have 2 more pages worth of questions, but I see we're 15 minutes beyond our schedule. So I wanted to bring up Elizabeth Lyle, who will do our wrap-up, as well as give you a bit of a preview of Accessibility and Innovation Forum that we have planned. So we'll be certainly meeting again, and she'll give you a little preview of that.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lyle, and it's just great to see everybody here today, and what a fabulous program. I mean, I learned a lot this morning. It was great to hear your panel today and get all your perspectives, so thank you so much for your participation. And thank you for staying to 10 to 4. You can put the 10-minute clock on for me if you want, or 7 or 6, whatever. I want to make clear, first of all, that there seemed to be a half-hour allotted for me. I promise. I will be done when the shot clock says to. And I just wanted to, first of all, just if you can mark your calendars, we do have a date for our ADA celebration, the American with Disabilities Act. That's going to be on Monday afternoon, July 19th. And we look forward to having you here. Some of you might not think that fun and FCC go together in the same sentence, but we promise to have a fun, educational, commemorative event that we're all looking forward to. And I just wanted to take just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about our commission-wide efforts that we're all working on now, which is the launch of our Accessibility and Innovation Forum. And we are working really closely. It's a collaborative effort with CGB, our new media team, and then people from throughout the commission. And we're going to be seeking public input very soon. I think we're going to have a series of about 4 blog posts that will probably go up in the next couple of weeks. And I wanted to alert you to this because we really need and value public input as we try to use some new tools to tackle some of the challenges that are in front of us. I think, as Karen mentioned earlier, we're trying to think of all different creative ways to work through these issues. We have our rulemakings. We're going to be looking at our enforcement, and we're looking at collaborative tools, both online and in person. And it's a recommendation in the broadband plan of establishing an accessibility and innovation forum. And some of the issues that we're interested in pursuing and getting your input on, so we can think about what can work in a way that we can really learn a lot about and use new tools and bring new people to the table is the idea. And we love all the people that always come to our table, so we want to be as inclusive as possible. But some ideas, for example, we want to seek some information about, a clearinghouse as we go forward with that, and what's the best way to structure it. What kind of categories should we have? How can we have a mechanism for consumer input? I think what we're hearing is a lot of the problems is that sometimes there are products out there, but people just aren't aware of what they are, how they can be used. And so I think consumers can bring that information to us and to our attention and to other consumers' attentions. And then companies can make clear about what products they have and their capabilities. But there's some tricky questions with this. And it's a lot of maintenance, and how do you keep it from going out of date, just as you said. But those are the kinds of questions that we're going to be asking. And we would ask you for the clearinghouse, and I'll tell you a few other questions too. And we're going to ask you to respond to me, or Pam Gregory is going to be working closely with me and on these efforts. And as I said, there's a team with Karen and a lot of us. But you can also respond to our blog post. And we've also set up a docket where I think we'll have a deadline something like June 10th to get all the sort of written information that you might want to give us as well. So a clearinghouse is one set of ideas. Another idea from the National Broadband Plan is the Chairman's Award. And there are a couple of different ways to structure this as well. It could be a more traditional award where we have nominations, but I think another kind of thing that we're looking at is being able to go out into the field, tap into new, we would like to see innovative presentations. It might be a YouTube, it might be a blog, it might be a file comment from students. Like student clinics, whether law or technology clinics, grassroots activists, people out in the field telling us what are the real problems that they see and make those presentations to us. And then, we would post those presentations up on our website and have a kind of challenge for industry or anybody else that wants to participate to try to solve these problems. And we don't know how long the cycle might be, so we need to ask a lot of questions about, how should we structure this? And what are the best incentives to get people involved? And how can we reach out to a whole new group of students and others that don't participate in the FCC? And how can we use new open government processes and take advantage of all the new networking tools that there are to take advantage of that? So those are the kinds of things that we'd look at for the Chairman's Award. And not only the Chairman's Award, but have a ongoing kind of problem-solving commons. And the idea is that, we want to be engaged in part of this and let you know that we care and we're part of this, and we want to figure out how can we make people come to this problem-solving commons. And so we'd really, really like your input on that kind of issue. I have 1 minute and 13 seconds left, so quickly, another idea is to have a blog of ongoing efforts. There's so many things that are going on right now that we need to tap into the kinds of things that are already in place. There are all kinds of standards organizations, companies are making announcements, academia is working on things. And so I think what we'd really like to do is because we have resources, but like everyone else, we've limited resources, and I think we learn a lot by having guest blog posts. So we'd like you to help us think about what sorts of ongoing efforts should we be highlighting, what announcements are going on, what's going on with standards bodies, what's going on internationally, the federal level, state, local, tribal. So anyway, private sector efforts, I think there are all kinds of things that we can learn from. And then I think that we'll have ongoing workshops, field events, and as Karen said earlier today, collaborative dialogues where we can work through issues together too. And we're going to be asking all kinds of questions. None of this stuff is set in stone. We just really want your input, and we look forward to hearing from you. 2 seconds, all right. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.